Hello, everyone.
Hello from me as well.
Okay, we have, I think, 2 viewers already, so let's wait a couple more minutes so everybody can join. I think since you're limited on your time, I think we should probably start with your stuff, and then I'm trying to go as quickly as I can through my stuff so you can still see it.
Yep, we can do that.
So let's wait 1 more minute and then we're going to start. So to everybody in the chat, how are you doing? Hope you're looking forward to this. As always, we have some stuff planned for today.
Yeah, probably more than fits into a couple of hours.
Yeah, I think at least not more than last time, because last time was a whole bunch of stuff that I needed to get in there somehow. So amazed that I could cover everything.
Yep, it has been interesting though. It's always nice to, well, actually see those developments on the big map. Gives you much more understanding what's going on.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give everybody a little preview of the map that I prepared. So let me move it a little bit so the chat is not in the way. I think I have the Africa Core music also in here. That doesn't fit really well, but that'll come soon enough. Okay, so in case we start with yours, should I go to your first image?
Yep, please.
Okay.
At the moment, I'm not seeing anything, but
You're not seeing anything.
yeah, starting soon screen is still.
Oh, then you have a super high delay, yeah. Because I think I had that up for a minute already. Yeah, I'm actually streaming not with super low latency, so the delay might be a little higher than usual. But I have your first image up, so if you want to look at it yourself, it is up.
Okay, one moment. Because I'm still not seeing anything.
Actually make the music a little.
So, here we go. Yeah, hello and welcome everyone. What I've planned today, well, we will talk about Fall Road a lot today. Lieutenant Joker has prepared a lot of stuff. But as usual, from my side, there will be, some strategic and tactical insights. So I hope you're interested in that, and I hope everyone can learn something from that. And I prepared the Maginot map for this one. So you already should be able to see something, because I'm still not seeing anything, and that's a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I can see what I'm streaming on OBS. I have it up, so
Okay, because, well, then the delay is really high. So anyways, yeah, I think many people struggle with assessing maps and getting a feel for the map, or analyzing maps and doing their deployment in an informed kind of way. So what I plan to do is show you how you can quickly get a feel for a map, and how you can switch between strategic mindset and the tactical mindset, and yeah, really stay focused in the game, and yeah, basically switch back between the core level or division level and your Kampfgruppen. That's what happens in my mind a lot. So when going into a map, I'm of course on the strategic mindset, and I try to identify areas of interest. And if you take a look at the Maginot Line, obviously you have those red circles. Those are your key victory locations, and at the same time those are the positions of those big fortresses. So obviously you want to focus on getting them, and at the same time, so that are the big red arrows that are pointing towards them. So my plan is to first to check out the northern one, leave the center alone, and then push for the middle fortification. But at the same time, you always should note areas where you have no information about. I put blue circles around those, and those locations usually spike my interest immediately. So, well, I will reload the stream.
Yeah, Danny.
Something seems to be wrong on my side.
Yeah, Danny's already in, by the way. Hi, Danny.
Yeah, he can already see it. And now I can see it too, so there was something wrong with my stream.
Yeah, it depends on when you log in, then that sets your delay, so sometimes refreshing helps, yeah.
Yeah. So you always want to make a note of areas where you have no information about. So I put small red arrows in that directions, just as a reminder for myself. I want to check out those locations. And then you see a long red line, and this, in my opinion, is a very interesting feature of this map as well, because it blocks your movement for the second battle group that's consisting of the auxiliary units. So when I look at this map, I really feel the need to take control of those locations along those lines, because this will allow me flexibility. If I'm in control of those locations, I can shift units from left to right and put my auxiliary units there where I want them to be, and it opens up possibilities to assist in the push from the other side. Where your regular core forces are, there's nothing in the way, so you can immediately push in there and nothing will stop you. So you want to create a balance and enable your auxiliary units to do something, basically. So that are my thoughts when I look at this map. So I want a big force in the northern corner. Check out the blue circle there. I want a small force checking out the foresty area, because there could be something hidden in there. I want a small force poking directly at the city with the big fort, with the big gun in there, just to get a feel for how strong the defenses really are. That's just poking. If you read battle reports, you will often hear company or battalion so-and-so has been ordered to attack position and was repelled by heavy resistance or heavy artillery fire. So this is going to happen a lot, but still want to try and test out the defenses just to get a little bit of a feeling for them. And then there's obviously a big arrow that pushes straight to the center, because this is the crucial point on this map, I think, because here you can separate the forces and make something happen, basically. And then there's a small red arrow in the east as well, just to check out the other blue circle, because there could be lurking forces there. And that's purely the strategic point of view. And if you go into a map, don't fret too much about on which hex do I want to position units. Just form battle groups in your mind. major locations you want to take, areas you want to check out, areas you want to control. Drop units down and assign them the task. Yeah, make a flexible mix of units and then just go for it. Don't overthink it, just do it. The important thing is that you have a goal in mind. You have to form smaller groups of units and mentally assign them targets or tasks. I think that's the basic thing. Hi Richard Martin and hi Danny. So, and then the interesting part is when it comes to execution. So how well are you sticking to your goals and how well are your units achieving the goals you set yourselves? And I think that's a very important step if you want to improve your gameplay. Compare your initial plan with like 5 turns in, 10 turns in, and in the end. That way you can really analyze your gameplay and your mistakes and get better. Don't blame any failures on mispositioning or bad rolls or whatever. Just try to analyze your gameplay. That's the thing you can control. Of course, bad rolls will happen, but you can't control them. The only thing you can improve is how well you direct your battle groups in the game. So if we switch to the second picture, Lieutenant Joker.
Yeah, by the way, remind me that I tell people something about this map, because this map made me actually make a decision for the continuation of our co-op session. So I'll say something about this later.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I hope what I'm saying is somewhat clear and makes
absolutely
sense. It's the best thing I could come up. A lot of circles and arrows. But yeah, I hope you see
that's what military maps look like. Just wait until I'm showing mine. There's way more arrows on there.
Okay, perfect. So now you see I'm 5 turns into the game. I sadly don't have a screenshot where I'm 10 turns in, but you already will notice some interesting things. So if we go from the western north corner to the eastern southeastern corner, I will start talking about the north. So I immediately checked out this first blue circle, sent a big task force up there, and then I'm mentally kind of switching between my battle groups and the strategic command level. So my battle group self tells the commander, hey, there's not much up there. We can take out the fortress on our own. And then I take some of their units and make another battle group. So you'll see only 3 units go for the task I initially assigned to all of them. I split off the major forces and they already can do something different. So they will try to overwhelm the middle position here. So in the north, everything is going according to plan, and always stay flexible and really mentally switch between those command levels. I actually really do this in my mind. If we go diagonally downwards, you see this lone unit in the middle of this blue circle. He's saying, hey, nothing in there, it's safe. So all units that were assigned to this battle group already dispersed and do something different, and he will stay there, wait for an opportunity to participate or join another battle group. Then you see another single guy. He is sitting right beside this red arrow, and he did a little bit of poking. He tried to go for the city itself, blooded his nose, got back, and he's saying, hey, can't do anything. I will just wait. The defenses are really strong. So he will sit there until he gets support, or he will join another battle group. Then if you take a look at the big arrow, you see all those units are waiting in a line. So they did a little bit of poking. I got terrible damage doing so. But then they retreated and now they are waiting. Because alone they can't assault. So they are waiting until the support group on the other side is ready. And here you see I already took out most of the targets on the line, but not all of them. Because, yeah, defenses up there were rather weak. And I decided, well, I don't need the flexibility that much. I rather already want to commit in my push to the center. So I didn't take out those 2 fortifications, assembled all of the units on the other side of the big fortress, ready to make a push from 2 sides. So you can change plans midway, but always keep in mind to check back with your commander self if this is really a good idea. And if you do after action analysis, always keep in mind, was this a good idea or should I have stick to the plan? And here I really don't know, because I could have taken my time and have taken all the targets on the red line, and it would have been fine as well, I think, because I got a little bit stressed out during the gameplay and felt a lot of pressure. I had to, because I had blooded my nose on those big fortresses, I felt the need to make it happen and push in there. So yeah, this maybe was not necessary, but I did it. So if you want to commit, commit. And if we go down some more, you see there are a lot of units that are kind of split up. There's no arrow for them. And that's because there's not enough room for all of those units. So I split up another battle group and yeah, assigned them to just do a little bit of poking and threaten the whole length of the front. But they are not going in there because, yeah, they're basically waiting for the other groups to, yeah, get those fortresses down first. And then you see the last arrow where I sent another scouting unit ahead, and he is saying, oh my god, a lot of resistance is there. And yeah, I'm glad I checked out this location, and yeah, he will call for help and the commander can decide which units he will send down to support him. And always, yeah, kind of in your mind, switch those roles. The commander assigns the battle group's targets and the battle groups report back, we need more units or we don't need that many units. You can have, for example, this tank and send it elsewhere. In reality, a battle group hardly will give up a tank and send it somewhere else. But because you're in both roles, you can switch units around. And this mindset really helps me to stay focused on my goals. It helps me to be flexible. It helps me to have units where I need them. It helps me constantly regrouping. So I'm constantly, yeah, switching roles in my head, basically. That's what that's about. And yeah, I think it would be very interesting to have a picture on turn 10, but I didn't have a strategic view of that time. But you see, at least for 5 turns, I really sticked to the plan and it worked out in the end. So I hope that helps you in improving your gameplay. And I think this is a great way to analyze your own gameplay, by the way, and really get better and really track down the mistakes you make and really see where you kind of lost focus or veered away from your initial plan, maybe in a good way, but maybe in a bad way. and that way you will find out. So making overlays like that and switching the maps in, let's say, 5-turn steps, that really gives you a big picture of what's going on.
Yeah, and I did that a couple of times. Did it a couple of times. The replay feature is great for that, to just go through your game and just see what you originally planned to do, and then see what you're actually executing. And I've had it several times that I didn't notice from a specific point on I didn't stick to my plan, and that's why it fell apart, or I allocated forces and then later thought, why the hell am I allocating forces there? And not knowing what my thinking at the time was, it's best if you do that with a weak distance, because if you still know what you were trying to do, you might still fool yourself. As soon as you no longer remember what you were trying to do, you're looking at it objectively, and then you can really spot the problems. At Dijon, for example, I think I stuck to my plan very, very well. Maybe I committed a little too much around Dijon and took a little too much damage, but the plan that I had, sending one force on the left all the way around and sending one on the right, worked out really well. I never ran into any time problems. On other maps, like on Reims, for example, and I still don't know exactly, the French have a really weird way of pronouncing that city, so I can't reproduce that, but on that map, where I took a lot of damage, where I lost both of my scouts, first of all, sending the scouts ahead was really stupid, because not because I risked them, but because I risked them for no reason, because none of my units were in any way capable of actually exploiting anything those scouts were seeing. They were way far ahead, so that was completely stupid. But I also got stuck in certain positions a little too much. It's really great if you look at it. In general, I noticed I make a mistake that I really shouldn't be making, because I was militarily trained not to do them, but being trained and actually having experience and actually having done it a couple of times are two different things. I think any military leader will know that. Well, it's really true for any skill. Knowing the theory isn't enough. You actually need to have done it. There is a basic military principle that you want to make contact with the enemy with the least amount of forces that you can possibly do that with. That way, the majority of your forces is still free to maneuver. That way you can identify a threat, allocate the necessary forces to defeat that threat, and keep most of your units independent. That way you only stick as many units into an area as you need to handle that area. If you immediately make contact with everything, you might get bogged down and you lose your ability to take initiative and actually move around. On this map, I think I did that a little too much, especially on the southeastern flank with my 2nd division. I got stuck in too quickly, and then I noticed with my current deployment I can't really get through here. And then I didn't have a reserve anymore, and I couldn't maneuver anymore, so I got basically stuck. That was bad. I also sent units to the southeast, I think a scout and an infantry or something like that, and I ran into that armored counterattack. And the moment I spotted that attack, I should immediately have retreated, because there's also a military principle that firepower is everything. If you don't have the firepower to handle a situation, don't handle the situation. There's no reason to stick around if you can't overwhelm the enemy. Just get out of there, support somewhere else, and when you have the units free again, then you can deal with that situation. I didn't have the necessary forces down there to overwhelm the enemy, and I stuck there anyway, and I tried to do stupid traps and everything. I shouldn't have done that. I should have just, okay, there's an armored counterattack here, good to know, let's get the fuck out of here. But I tried to stick it out, and I tried to stick with my original plan of swinging around, and I considered the tanks to be just an obstacle on the way of getting there, but that's not what that was. I should have abandoned that entire plan, but I didn't. And that's
very easy to get pulled into a situation, I think, and that's why I brought up the switching between the command levels, because that helps me to stay a little bit detached. So if I am focused on one battle group, I don't grab another tank because I need it at the moment, because I need to push through. So I go back to the strategic mindset and ask for a tank, basically. And then the commander can decide, is this really worth it? But breaking this initial, this mindset of, I have to go through there, is very important, I think. Because that way you will make a lot of bad decisions.
Yeah, that's also why you should make contact with the least amount of force. It's a German principle that is now that was developed back then, I think, from the Germans, and it's basically practiced everywhere now, both in the defense and in the offense. You want to have, in the defense, for example, you have those outpost lines. I think anybody that has ever had basic training lay in a single position way forward, and you're supposed to lie there and notify everybody if something's happening, and usually nothing is happening because your commanding officers are not in the mood to do anything. So you're basically lying there all night in the cold and nothing's happening. But that's the principle. That force will make contact with the enemy, and that leaves the entire unit able to react. That's also in terms of formation for panzer divisions. If you have, for example, 3 platoons in a company, only 1 platoon will be front and the other ones will be in a wedge formation behind. That way, no matter where the enemy is coming from, only 1 platoon will make contact and the other 2 can still maneuver. If you know the direction at least where the enemy is coming from, then you put 2 in the front, but you at least still keep 1 in the back, so that 1 is still able to maneuver. You never make contact with your entire force. That gives you not enough room to maneuver, and it leaves you unable to take initiative. And especially on this map, I didn't do that. The other thing I wanted to tell you about this map is I have had 2 maps now where the mod that I was playing with removed auxiliary forces and gave me more deployment spots in return. That was, I think I had a couple more, but the most important ones were Arras, Spoils of War, and this one. And in all 3, I noticed that I took extraordinary amounts of losses compared to what I should have been taking. And I noticed from analyzing, especially on this map, was that on all 3 maps, but especially on this one, and also a little bit on Arras, but also on Spoils of War with the additional cavalry. But this one was the most obvious one. The auxiliary forces that I got were not just additional forces, there were specific types of forces. Like on this one, I had a ton of pioneers. On Spoils of War, you have a lot of fast mobile infantry with the cavalry. And on Arras, I would have had a lot more heavy anti-tank units, like all the 88s and some other stuff that was there. So I decided from now on, in 1941, I will play the unmodded version, the same one Rocketa is playing, because I do not think that is actually a good decision by the modder. The deployment spots don't help you because you don't have that many of those specialized forces. So you can't deploy the same kind of stuff. You can deploy more tanks or more infantry or more air force, but that doesn't help you. On this map, you have a ton of mines, a ton of fortified positions. You need those pioneers. So that made all 3 scenarios way more difficult than they should have been. And I looked at a certain graphic that I can maybe show later, where I clearly see that I take way more losses on all these 3 maps than I should have taken. So that made me decide to no longer play the modded version, even though I like some stuff like the exit hexes, but it's not worth it. Some of these maps have been messed up by that. So on this map, I think it would have been way easier if I had those pioneers. That would have especially helped me get out of my stuck position, because I could have attacked from the other side with the pioneers and moved their way towards me and offer the enemy a second front, but I couldn't do that.
Yeah, it's not only the front, it's the pioneers specifically, because they are a high priority target for the enemy fortresses and artillery, so you can really avoid a lot of damage by offering them.
Yeah, and the other reason, the non-gameplay reason, is The basic idea behind this entire cooperation let's play, also why we pick certain units in our core and everything, was to play it as historically as possible, as far as the scenarios allow that. And I actually wanted to play the modded version to get a little bit more historical accuracy out of there, because, for example, in Stalingrad he replaced the Italians with the correct Romanians, which were originally used in the map because Soviet Corps hadn't come out yet, so the Romanians didn't have enough units simply in the set. So they used the Italians to compensate for that. But here, especially on this map, this made the scenario unhistorical. Because as you will see later, Army Group C was attacking from the other side, was attacking through the marginal line. This was a two-pronged attack. And like this, I basically attacked the marginal line only from one side. There should be an entire army, an entire German army attacking from the other side. And that wasn't the case anymore. So that made this scenario completely unhistorical the way I played it. And that is, of course, not what I want to achieve. That's yet another reason why I will play the unmodded version from now on.
Yeah, I think that's always a problem with mods. They make some things better, but usually there's a huge drawback.
Yeah, I was trusting in this one a little bit more because the modder is actually one of the scenario designers that designed a couple of scenarios for Panzer Corps. I think one of the campaigns, I think even one grand campaign, but in this one, I don't know which campaign he designed, but I think he designed a couple things. But here he made some, I think he made those mods step by step. I think he first just wanted to introduce some units that were added by later campaigns, later DLCs. Fine, that was great. Then he introduced those exit hexes. That's also great. And then he started to change more things. And I think those later changes were the ones that actually caused the problems. I think he should have stuck with just switching units around against types that were later introduced, and maybe introduce the exit hexes and leave it at that. But he made more extreme changes, and I think those more extreme changes are the ones that messed it up. Yeah, and what I found interesting about this map also was that we basically formulated our initial plan the same way. We basically wanted to go to both outer targets first and then collapse the enemy in the middle. I think we both didn't really 100% execute it that way, but I think you came the closest, and I think for both of us the northern group worked the best, while the southern group had a couple of issues. But you had less issues in the south because you had all those pioneers from Army Group C helping you, and since I didn't have those, I got stuck. We both also actually got surprised by the armored counterattack, but you handled it much better because you didn't try to engage it with forces that couldn't handle it. I got stuck there with a pioneer, I think, with another infantry and a scout or something like that, and basically all three of those units got horribly mauled. I shouldn't have attacked there at all. You just completely ignored the southern position because you, I guess, in your strategic mindset, you just saw that you didn't have any units to spare to do anything with that region, so you just left it for later. I tried to go there anyway, and yeah, that didn't work out so great.
Yeah, I immediately withdraw there and try to trap them at least, or stop them or delay them, just to buy time so that I can handle them later.
Yeah, that's exactly how you should do it. You should attack where you have the firepower to do something, and you should delay the enemy where you don't have the firepower to do something. There you should just let them come, because being on the offensive is not easy. Being on the defensive is much easier. So you need the firepower to go offensive. On the defensive, sometimes you can afford being a little bit outnumbered, at least for a certain time. So you can just delay and start slowly retreating while you make advances elsewhere. I tried to basically attack everywhere at once, and that is never a good idea. And I didn't have the reserves anymore because I also got my tanks all in the front, all already stuck in, already engaged with the enemy, and that left me really struggling. And I couldn't really maneuver my most mobile units anymore, which is always a big mistake.
Yeah, definitely. And if you take a look at the units here, you will see that I almost always have units in the back that are open and not engaged.
Yeah. I think we both got damaged with our Panzer IV. Again, the Panzer IVs are still not doing well.
Are horrible.
But I think the new ones in 1941 will be much better.
I already love them. They're perfect.
Yeah, I haven't watched Belgrade yet, but because obviously I haven't played it yet. But yeah, I can guess that they probably perform a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't even compare. So let me know in the comments if you like that style of representation, because then we might be able to do for future maps like really a step-by-step, like initial assessment, turn 5, turn 10, turn 15, whatever, and really compare the progress with the initial plan and see what's actually going on a strategic level.
Yeah, and we will try to continue telling you what we did wrong, because obviously we're still not at the perfection level here, and we still
no, definitely not. It's there's always things to improve, and I always watch my own videos, and there's so many things I notice, but yeah, I don't want to point out all errors. It doesn't help as well, I think. So you should be balanced. There's things each of us did good and other things that were not so good. So you have to take a look at both sides always.
Yeah, definitely. But I like to point out the errors that were errors in how we approached certain things, because if those are the things that you can learn from best. I mean, we all make individual mistakes because we're currently not concentrated, or we've been playing too long, or we have other things on our mind. That will always happen. But if we did something specifically wrong in how we approach the situation, that is something that you can learn from, because I think that has to do with certain mindsets that you easily get into when you're not too experienced, and that you need to try and not do, and you need to be really focused and aware of those tendencies that you might run into to prevent yourself from making those mistakes, and try. And having 2 points of view, one on the lower level and one on the higher strategic level, certainly helps already to avoid that, because you always have a kind of a second view, a second look of things. You try to always take a look at the big picture, and that's already one step on avoiding certain mistakes that you can easily make.
Yep, and I really want to encourage you to look just like Richard Martin. I really want to encourage you to take a more strategic look on Panzer Corps, and there's really a lot of things you can do and explore. And yeah, of course, on the Kampfgruppen level, there's always a lot of tactical battles going on. But by switching back to a strategic command level, you will quickly notice that there's a lot on the strategic level going on, where you put, well, not the operational level on a bigger scale, but on this small map scale, there's a lot of strategy involved.
Goose trying to teach his kids math. That's also important. Anyway, I'm going to a lot of these things that we now discussed, getting stuck into early and taking a look at the big picture, is stuff that you will actually recognize once I go into the actual battle plans. And let me actually switch to this.
Yep.
So first of all, I start with the normal order of battle. This time I added some photographs to all the generals, just to get you a little bit more familiar with them, because a lot of these people will stick around for most of the war. So you will see them again over the next couple DLCs. So it obviously makes sense to maybe try to familiarize yourself with them. So we still have 3 army groups. Army group, there's also something that I need to mention still from the last time. And last time I said I don't really know who was responsible for the halt order, probably Hitler and all that stuff. I actually looked into that a little bit more. I was a little under time pressure last time, so I didn't get to read everything before I started the stream. It actually turns out...
we are talking about Dunkirk, by the way.
We're talking about Dunkirk, yeah, the halt order right before Dunkirk. Who was responsible for that? And I looked into that and read about how that actually happened. And it turns out this guy, von Rundstedt, I think I need to tell you again a little bit where these guys actually were. Von Rundstedt with Army Group A basically had the majority of the Panzer forces, Guderian and all those guys. He was the one actually making the Sickle cut. While Army Group B under Bock was the one attacking right into the Belgian positions and basically being the diversionary attack. So the halt order for the Panzer forces basically came from Army Group A, from Rundstedt, because he was the guy in command of all those armored forces. He was really worried about a counterattack from the south, and Hitler liked that because Hitler also was a little worried about a counterattack from the south. The certain tries of the Allies to actually counterattack, which didn't really amount to anything, but they kind of seemed to confirm that fear. So eventually, Rundstedt was not only worried about counterattacks, he also didn't really like his armored forces to go haywire and just run around, and he never really know where they were. I mean, what all those armored forces did, I explained last time, that they basically didn't follow orders, never reported back, and especially Guderian and Rommel were famous for going forward and not telling anybody where they were, and usually nobody had any idea where they were at. Rundstedt, as a very, very conservative Prussian officer, didn't really like that. So after they had basically cut off the Allied forces at Dunkirk, in the area that was still a big pocket, they hadn't even crossed the Escaut or the Scheldt River yet. The Germans hadn't crossed that yet, so the Allies were still holding that line, that backup plan. He basically ordered the Panzer forces to halt, to refresh, because he was already thinking about the next phase of the plan, and he wanted them to refresh and already prepare for that. And he stopped them, and Army Group B actually got the order to do the cleanup, basically, the cleanup work. The problem with that was twofold. First of all, obviously, the Panzers were halted, the advance towards Dunkirk was stopped, but also Army Group B, that was now in charge with collapsing the pocket, did not have any tanks. As you might remember, Panzer Division 3 and 4 had been assigned to Army Group A. They had initially been at B, but later all the Panzers had moved to Army Group A to continue and finish the Sickle cut. So now the entire collapsing of that pocket was going very, very slow because Bock didn't have any really mobile forces. On part that was a problem, on part that was exactly what they were trying to achieve, because they were trying to save their most valuable units for the next part of the plan. Who was right or not, you can argue here. But the real problem turned on when Brauchitsch and Halder, Brauchitsch as the commander of the army, Halder as his chief of staff, didn't agree with this. They wanted to keep using the Panzers to go forward, take Calais, take Dunkirk, and basically cut the pocket off of all the ports. Keep going. Now something happened that was a first, but unfortunately will not be the last time. Hitler immediately interfered, and he created now a situation that is very, very bad for a chain of command. He basically told Brauchitsch that the Panzers would only move if Rundstedt agreed. So now Brauchitsch, who was Rundstedt's commanding officer, had to basically ask his subordinate whether he was okay with moving the Panzers, because Hitler trusted Rundstedt more than Brauchitsch. So that created a really bad situation that the commander of the army now had to refer to one of his army group commanders because he had Hitler behind him. So you can imagine what that does to a chain of command. So Rundstedt was the actual person that made the order, but Hitler enforced it by telling Brauchitsch he couldn't undo the order unless Rundstedt was okay with it. There was even certain developments that Halder, the chief of staff, noticed that Rundstedt didn't really seem to be in line with the original Zickelschnitt plan. So he said, okay, you know what? Rundstedt doesn't seem to be comfortable with this, so we'll do the following. We'll put all the panzers under command of Army Group 4 of Army 4, 4th Army under Kluge, which so far had done well. We'll put Rundstedt in charge of establishing a continuous defensive front line, the blue line that you see here, and prepare for the next phase. And we'll put all the panzers of 4th Army under command of Bock of Army Group B. So he can use those panzers to collapse the gap and destroy them all. So they basically took all the panzers away from Rundstedt and wanted to give them to von Bock, which didn't seem to have Rundstedt's objections. Hitler heard of this plan and basically countermanded it. He told them to take that order back and that no panzer forces would be reallocated anywhere without first asking him for approval. That made that fall under the bus. So you can see that Hitler is basically interfering on a level here that is basically ripping the entire chain of command apart. He's basically directly interfering with decisions of his army leadership. And that will have consequences until much later, where he will continue to do so. But this was the first time he did it on a major level. So Hitler is to blame. But the one that actually came up with the halt order is Rundstedt. Hitler only confirmed that. If Rundstedt hadn't come up with it, Hitler would not have given the order by himself. Hitler only confirmed the order. He didn't give the order. So just to clear that up, so Rundstedt is much to blame, which is, funnily enough, the guy, Rundstedt's chief of staff, used to be Manstein. So Manstein's superior, with whom he actually came up with the plan, later kind of messed the plan up. Which is also kind of strange, because the Allies after the war will say about Rundstedt that he was one of the best panzer commanders they ever met on the battlefield. Considering how this went, we'll see what he does later, but here he certainly didn't prove himself to be the great panzer commander. So that was one of the problems that I wanted to comment a little bit on, that I got maybe wrong or didn't comment on enough on the last time. But as I said, Bock was dealing with the pocket. Rundstedt was already free to prepare for the next phase and had most of the panzers under his command. But while there was 18th Army still busy with collapsing the gap finally, all the other armies were already replaced. And there's one thing worth note. I have a lot of notes on this map, so let me get to those. This is actually the most important one over here. You may think that going to Fall Road right after Fall Gelb was not a big deal. It actually was. The German army under no circumstances was ever before capable of launching a major offensive right after another one. Usually that took several weeks, especially in the First World War. To do that within a couple of days, basically just 5 days after Fall Gelb was done, they had already attacked again, was a major logistics problem. Because you may hear about the rail network's importance for the German army a lot. That was because the German army just didn't have the fuel or the spare parts or any of that to keep its army supplied by trucks. So instead they did it by rail. First of all, that spared a lot of resources. The problem with that is you have to basically transport everything from home to the front, and everything that you need to repair, you have to transport from the front all the way home. The logistics officer in charge here actually put a forward vehicle facility in Belgium to try and repair some of the tanks, at least some of them that weren't too badly damaged, closer to the front. But the really badly damaged stuff had to go back to Germany, so those tanks would not be ready in time. Same stuff is with fuel, ammunition, all the supplies, basically all the mobile units, all the major frontline units. By the time they reached the channel, were completely out of everything. They could still keep going kind of towards Dunkirk, but they were not in any way ready for a new offensive. They had basically run out of everything. So, as the text says here, to get everything ready again, also the planes, I mean, they had, most of the fighters had taken up Allied airfields near the front, but they still needed the fuel and the ammunition transported to them. So they needed to push, in a couple of days, 50,000 tons of supplies to the forward depots. That's 200 train loads within a couple of days to make the German army ready for File Road. That is really, as it says here, a logistically amazing accomplishment. And whoever was in charge of this, I already mentioned last time that the logistics preparation for Fall Gelb was already amazing, but this one probably topped it even more. So, and I think this was the same logistics offer that later announced that Barbarossa probably wouldn't be possible from a logistics point, but at that time nobody was listening. And he was proven right again. So that you might want to keep in mind. There's also a thing about Belgium. Belgium, you have to keep in mind, was one of those democracies that basically neglected their military a lot due to budgetary reasons. And in the 18 days that they were actually in the campaign, they usually left the fighting mostly to the other allies, and also took smaller areas along the Dial line than others. They, for example, didn't want to take more room that the British demanded, so the British with their BEF had to cover more ground, which basically made them unable to free forces to react to what the Germans were doing. As I mentioned, getting stuck in with everything leaves you nothing to maneuver. And they had to do that because the Belgians weren't willing to take more of the front line. So, yeah, this is a general problem with the Allies at this point. They don't communicate, they don't really have any idea what the other is capable of. And the historian of another book I read basically says if the French and the British had been aware what the Belgians were willing and able to do, they would probably not have gone for the Dial plan, because they overestimated what the Belgians would be capable of contributing, and that was part of the problem. I also said something about Maubeuge, that I didn't know anything about a general being captured. I completely forgot about that, and it is actually in the book. The army commander of 9th Army, Giraud, was indeed captured at Maubeuge by Guderian's forces on 19th May. So that is actually historical, what happened there. Not sure that it happened like that, like we do in the scenario, going in and then running away. And they simply overran his headquarters. That's basically what happened. There wasn't any counterattack happening after that. They basically smashed through 9th Army, and it was such chaos that they basically overran his headquarters and captured the general. That's basically what happened, but obviously that wouldn't make for a very interesting scenario. There's also another thing about, let me actually get rid of the photos here. There's another thing, you might think that Dunkirk was a problem only because of the halt order. No, that is not necessarily the case. A lot of stuff was delayed because the British landed in Calais, which is a scenario in the Grand Campaign. That delayed a lot of stuff, especially most of Guderian's artillery was delayed there and tried to help clean that up, so he didn't have enough artillery to push ahead. And some French guy actually made a stand along this line, Gravelin and Watten down here. There is a small river there. Along that river line, they really dug in and gave the Germans quite a bit of hard time. At the time they attacked again, it had also rained, and that is a little bit marshy terrain. So once that turns wet, it's not that great for tanks anymore. So that is also a problem. So it's not just that the Germans messed up. The Allies actually did their part to delay them also. Which one had the greater impact is probably not that easy to say. There is also something going on along the front line before we even go into the attack. Gamela had been replaced at this point by Weygand, as I said last time. And Weygand at this point apparently wasn't really aware what his forces were capable of. Again, a common problem at the time with the Allies. He still thought that the pocket could break out and ordered basically the Somme front around Abbeville and Amiens, where the Germans had already bridgeheads across the Somme. So basically at Amiens and Abbeville were not behind the Somme, were already past the Somme. He wanted to crush those bridgeheads and then connect with the forces from the pocket again. So that's also why he flew into the pocket and tried to convince them to counterattack and break out, because he was one of those French generals that had this doctrinal idea that morale was the most important thing. So if you could just get them to break out, everything would work. That they were in no way capable of doing that anymore. It just didn't process, apparently. So he wanted to attack. So there was actually a Battle of Abbeville, fought from the 17th of May until 4th of June. Case Red starts right the next day after that. And unfortunately, from the Allied perspective, I'm just going to read that, that was a fiasco. Not only had the Allied counterattacks at Abbeville failed to eliminate the breachheads, but they had squandered well over 200 tanks and 2,000 troops in the course of the fighting. 3 Allied armored divisions were mauled. That is the 1st armored division of the British, part of the BF, but the armored division landed a little bit after the campaign had already begun, so they weren't part of the initial BF. That's why they weren't trapped. I think one of the brigades was actually trapped, but there were still 2 brigades left, so the 2nd and 3rd brigade was still outside of the gap in this area. There was also a 2nd DCR and 4th DCR. 4th is de Gaulle. 2nd was rebuilt and tried to get rid of some of the losses that they had sustained so far and tried to rebuild that division. And they also had 3 kind of light cavalry divisions, which those are not the cavalry divisions that have the Samoa tanks. Those are the even lighter ones, which just have the Renault tanks and that kind of stuff. But they tried to attack with that, but it didn't work. There were a number of reasons for that. First of all, again, they didn't really attack with support by infantry. They also didn't have all the artillery that they needed. They basically didn't have any air support, even though the German Luftwaffe at the time wasn't really helping much. They were focusing on Dunkirk. And also, yeah, they again attacked a little bit in piecemeal and not really coordinated. The coordination between the French and the British didn't really work. And there's actually the story about this young guy, Private Hubert Brinkford, who was promoted after this to Gefreiter, which is private first class, I guess, and was suggested by Manstein for the Knight's Cross. He didn't get it now, although he got the Iron Cross. He got the Knight's Cross later in Russia, and he was the first enlisted man to ever get the Knight's Cross. He alone, with his 3.7 centimeter anti-tank gun, shot I think 8 or 9 enemy tanks. Most of those were British, or all of those were British, I think. I'm pretty sure he couldn't kill any French tanks with the 3.7. And that was the problem. The British attacked in here, And not only didn't they have enough infantry support, one of the main problems about the British tanks at the time was that they basically didn't have any kind of HE shell. The 2-pounder of the British at the time did not have any high explosive grenade. If anything, if they were attacked by anti-tank guns, the basic idea was to screen forces against those with shooting smoke. And in the attacks here, they didn't even have any smoke shells left. They were out of smoke ammo, so they didn't even have that. Brickford actually wrote in his diary that he got shot at left and right, and there was basically a hell of steel. But they didn't hit him because they basically were shooting with anti-tank ammunition. So unless they got a direct hit, all those hits would basically not do a whole lot. And that lack of HE ammunition will actually follow the British into the Africa War until they get the American M3 Lee, or the Grant in their case, with that big 7.5 centimeter gun in the hull. Now they finally had a gun that could shoot HE and also engage anti-tank guns. Until that point, they just didn't have much in the tanks to engage German anti-tank guns with, and that's why this guy was so successful. They shot at him, but they weren't accurate enough, and if you shoot with something that doesn't explode, you have to land a direct hit, and they didn't land a direct hit. So he took out 9 of the attacking tanks all on his own. Later, the French also attacked, mostly with de Gaulle, and yeah, then the 3.7 centimeter guns didn't turn out so well. The Germans were shocked to see all that stuff just bounce off, and by the end of this battle, the Germans in the area, which were from 2nd Motorized Infantry Division, had basically lost all their anti-tank guns. But they had still repulsed the enemy. Not so much with the 3.7 centimeter, however, which will still prove to be a major German weakness in Russia, but with anti-tank mines, with Stukas, and with the 88s. So the 88s were again the ones that held the ground, and yeah, the French just didn't have enough here to actually push through. So they basically just wiped out most of their tanks in trying to crush the German bridgeheads here, because instead of going for the defensive posture, Weygand was somehow convinced that he should be going on the offensive here. And that left them basically, as the text says here, in a completely poor condition to resist Fall Road. Because yeah, basically in this area they had three full tank divisions, and instead of keeping them as a reserve for when the Germans were going to attack, they mauled them in the Battle of Abbeville, and by the time the Germans attacked, they basically didn't have any tanks left. So that was a big problem. So, in case you're wondering about French counterattacks and Allied counterattacks, they did happen. By the way, if you remember the France map in the Vanilla campaign, in the northwestern sector, you will see there's a lot of French tanks and also a British cruiser tank attacking you there. That's these divisions. That cruiser tank is 1st Armored Division of the British, so that map is pretty accurate in that regard.
One question. I'm a little bit lost regarding the Panzer Corps maps. Where are we in terms of scenarios here?
Yeah, the first scenario is...
I know that the French... I know France, but I can't place the maps at the moment.
So, what did we have? We had Reims, we had Dijon, we had Maginot Line. There was one missing. We had another one.
Yeah, that's... I don't even remember the name of the maps.
Let me actually check here. Because I think I'm missing one. Grand Campaign 40.
But it's extremely interesting.
Grand Campaign 40. No, that's actually the 3 that we had. We had Reims, we had Dijon, and we had Maginot Line. So, Reims is over here. Right there. Dijon is down there. That's the Swiss border over there. And the Maginot Line is over here. Metz is right there. That's the big thing in the middle. Just tell me when you see where I'm pointing at.
Yep.
I will actually go into that. I just wanted to say what the French are doing. Unfortunately, we don't see anything from the northwestern sector. So basically everything that Army Group B is doing, we're not part of that. Basically everything that we do in the Grand Campaign is Army Group A. Since that's where Guderian attacks. So, now that the French basically tried to attack and completely wasted their efforts and made their situation even worse, before I go into the German plan, let me tell you what the situation of the French is. Weygand at this point has a very defeatist attitude. At least that's what de Gaulle wrote in his memoirs. Might have been not that bad, but the fact is, once Weygand realized that he couldn't attack anymore, on 10th June, he basically suggested to the government already to go for an armistice. So he didn't believe in this having any hope anymore. The moment he saw that he couldn't attack anymore and couldn't do anything active anymore, he said, okay, he didn't even want to go for any kind of defensive stance. The government under Renault suggested abandoning the Somme position and going behind the Seine, because one of the Army Group commanders, Army Group 2, Prételat, I think it was, said that it would be stupid to try and hold the line on a river that was already compromised, because again, the Germans already had bridgehead at Amiens and Abbeville across the Somme. So from that point of view, do you really want to defend on a river that the other side already has bridgeheads on? But he decided, nope, this is where we're gonna make our stand. If that doesn't work, then France is defeated. That was basically his attitude. So he didn't want to go for contingency plans. He didn't want to prepare a second line of defense. He said, nope, this is what we'll do. And if this doesn't work, we're done. Yeah, whether that's the best way of doing it, you can talk about whether falling back behind the Seine would have changed things. Well, they could have prepared a certain line. The problem with that would have been Paris would have been at the front line. You can argue, some historians say that Paris should have turned into a fortified city. I'm not so sure about that from a historical point of view. Maybe that would have been good for the battle. It probably wouldn't have been good for Paris. Because if you look at what happened to Warsaw, I really, from a cultural perspective, don't want to see Paris bombed to smithereens. And I'm pretty sure Hitler would have done that. Considering his experience in the First World War, he absolutely would have done that. After the Germans retreated out of Paris in 1944, he even ordered the destruction of the entire city. Thankfully, the commander of Paris didn't do that. So that would have been the alternatives. Weygand didn't go for that, and he established the Weygand line. The blue line that you see is basically what was known as the Weygand line, across the Aisne River over here and the Somme River and the gaps between those, then all the way over across the Maas to the Maginot line. That was basically the line of defense. Yeah, you could argue whether the French really had a chance at this point, but you have to keep in mind, at this point, the morale of the French army was actually pretty high again. They had established a new line. They were no longer surprised now. Now they actually knew what the Germans were doing, and they were even anticipating what the Germans were going to do in case red pretty accurately. So they were not going to be surprised. They basically knew what the Germans were going to do, and they had learned from past mistakes. The one good thing that Weygand did, we put that note in here. He established what was called the quadrillage. So the French had basically noticed that the Germans had a tendency of breaking through with tanks and then avoiding strong point position and just going around them. What they did, therefore, was, first of all, they established a defense in depth. Basically, a little bit what the Russians will do later at Kursk. And defense in depth is basically what's horrible for Blitzkrieg, because you break through one line, there's another line behind that, and another one, so it takes forever to get through. And that was successful. The Germans actually took 2 days to break through the new line. which Manstein also mentioned in his memoirs. That's why he wanted to immediately attack towards the southwest or the southeast to prevent a new line from being established, because he feared if they managed to get a new line, we might have trouble to get through that. That's exactly what Manstein predicted, and that's exactly what happened here. And they did very well. For those 2 days, they really got the Germans very big trouble. And the Germans actually took over half of the losses of the entire campaign in case red, not in case yellow. So they took way more, like 5% more or 10% more losses in the second phase of this campaign. So if you think this is just a mop-up operation, think again. This was actually relatively bloody. The idea behind the quadrillage was not just defense in depth, it was also hedgehog positions. You basically have positions that are able to defend from all sides with artillery and anti-tank support, and are usually in positions that are unsuitable for tanks. So cities, forests, all kinds of terrain that tanks are not really good in. And those gave the Germans really some problems, because just breaking through on one side and going around and then overrunning these positions from behind doesn't work. So while the French map with the French buying units like crazy around the cities is not exactly representative of what really happened, but as annoying as those positions are in the game, you can imagine those things as quadrillages being all along the front line, not in cities, but like in forests and in other positions. Imagine these circles of all kinds of stuff, artillery in the middle and infantry and tank guns on the outside and maybe some anti-air stuff. And then you can imagine that the Germans didn't have an easy time of taking those apart, because we all know from the game those kind of positions where the AI bought an entire circle of crap are not easy to take apart and take a little bit of time. That's happened all over the place here. So the French really learned. The French also, as much as I said last time that the French leadership was complete crap, you have to give the guys on the ground some credit. On the core level, they actually started to take initiative here, to even do Auftragstaktik, to improvise, to just go ahead and do stuff, take initiative. And they did that really, really well. And in many places, they went toe-to-toe with the Germans and held them off for quite some time. So while the higher leadership was still pretty crap, on the lower level, they really could go toe-to-toe. And those were the actual younger commanders that could fight a modern war. Unfortunately, those were not the ones in charge. Not that the Germans didn't have interference from high level either, as I mentioned earlier. It wasn't just Hitler that messed things up. So those 2 first days for the Germans were not easy, and they took a lot of losses here. And the French learned how to take out German tanks. They at this point just didn't have enough stuff at the right place, and where they achieved successes, they were on the tactical or not on the operational or strategic level, because the higher leadership just couldn't deal with it anymore. Also, at this point, the German forces basically outnumbered the French by 2-1. There were basically no Allied forces except for a couple of the mauled British that were left here. And while 100,000 French forces that were evacuated from the pocket had been repatriated and re-equipped, they just couldn't fully compensate for the losses at Dunkirk. However, they were able to restock some of the Panzer units, some of the tank units with new stuff, because the war production of the French nation had actually ramped up quite a bit. So they were able to produce like 100 or so tanks, and the new fighter arrived, the D520 or whatever it's called. I always forget what that thing is called, but that's the really good fighter the French have. And it also makes sense that you encounter that the first time on the vanilla France map, because at Belgium that wasn't there yet. It hadn't been distributed to the French Air Force yet, but by that time it arrived, and that thing could really go toe-to-toe with the Bf-109. So all that stuff started to arrive, and the French knew that. So units were being re-equipped, they had a new front line, they now knew where the Germans were going to come from. So morale at this point was actually surprisingly high in the French army. So this wasn't just easy going and now we just need to mop these guys up. No, the French were actually going to give the Germans a fight here. just didn't turn out that they could actually still do it. But if this had happened right from the start, like say they wouldn't have adopted the dial plan, and they would have decided, nope, we're not going to go into Belgium, we're going to do this ourselves, forget about the Belgians, they're not going to be able to contribute much, we're going to do this line as a line of defense right away, we're going to prepare in defense in depth, and we're going to communicate better with our British counterparts and make this a concerted defensive effort, then the Germans would have probably run into major problems. But unfortunately, the first phase of the campaign basically made this a foregone conclusion. But it wasn't easy to clean it up. 7th Army, as you might remember, that was actually the army, basically the entire Army Group 1 was in the trap, but mainly 7th Army. As I said, that was the army that was originally going to be a reserve and then later was sent up with the Brega variant all the way into the Netherlands, which didn't work. So 7th Army was basically completely destroyed. Eventually, they were actually disbanded up there, and the remaining forces were put under Belgian command. A new 7th Army was actually established down here, and that army was responsible for trying to establish a front line along the Somme. Later, they got an old buddy of his out of retirement, Altmaier, and gave him 10th Army command. So now 7th Army was for the Upper Somme and 10th Army for the Lower Somme. And 10th Army took the brunt of the German Panzer attack, including Manstein, by the way. Manstein was now back at the front. His army corps was finally ready, and he will attack here together with the Panzer Corps of Hoth. Manstein doesn't have any panzers, he only has infantry divisions, but he will attack together here. So he will also take part in stabilizing against those counterattacks that I mentioned earlier. He's already there by that time. But he's just a corps commander, he's not responsible for anything more. He even insists again at this point that they should, while the mopping up at Dunkirk is still going on, that they should go on the offensive and actually prevent the French from being able to establish a front line here. But High Command said, nope, we're now going to concentrate on Dunkirk, and then we're going to make a proper setup, and only then are we going to go on the offensive. And that, again, allowed the French to actually build up a defensive. He had asked them to, first in his original Manstein plan, to go already after Sedan in the southwest, so towards the Reims region. That would have prevented the French from building up a front line at the Aisne. That was given away. Now that front line was fortified again, and then he wanted to do that again at the Lower Somme to at least prevent a front line there. And again, they didn't let him do that. And again, the French were able to build a front line there. So if they had listened to Manstein right from the start, the Weygand line basically never would have happened. Due to the fact that it did cost Germany 2 hard days of fighting and a lot of losses to break through. That's also why I said the original Manstein plan was never executed, because that was the central part of his plan, to prevent the French from being able to establish a second front line. He was already thinking ahead. Halder, by the way, also wanted to do that, at least in the Reims region, but he wasn't allowed to do that also.
Do you think it would have been possible to do it, considering the logistic situation, or is it...
Yeah, I think at least this wasn't meant to already start Case Red, the full-blown on attack. It was basically just meant to take one army. I think 12th Army. I think Halder thought about doing that with 12th Army. Manstein didn't know which one. He just wanted one army, any one army that could be spared. Those wasn't supposed to be panzers. Just one infantry army was going to go southeast. They didn't have to take a lot of ground. All they had to do was prevent the French from having the time to establish a fortified line. So they were just there to keep the French off balance and keeping them from re-establishing a continuous line. That was the entire idea. They didn't have to conquer France. Just keep the French busy fighting so they wouldn't be able to reconnect the lines. That was the only idea behind that. And on the course of the battle, they did have an army free for that. 12th Army, I think, is what Halder wanted to do, because Halder was in charge of the entire operation. And if he, in the middle of the battle, said, okay, we might actually want to send this army down there, if he decides that, then obviously he thought he could spare that army.
Yeah, and I think Halder is a rather cautious type, wasn't he?
Yeah, he originally wasn't in favor of the plan of Manstein, and later, once he saw that it was actually working, then he adopted Manstein's idea and even wanted to go one further. He even wanted to attack a little bit more in 2 directions at the same time. He even wanted to split off potentially an entire army group in 2 and go in 1 direction with that. So he wanted to go even further than Manstein wanted to go, but he wasn't allowed to. Initially he was cautious, but again, he was part of the resistance at the time, and yeah. There was 2 reasons why he might have not been in favor of the plan. First of all, he was still fighting to get rid of Hitler, so he wasn't interested in a solution that would work. And second, there was a personal rivalry between Halder and Manstein, because again, Manstein had been originally planned to be chief of staff under Beck, but when Beck got purged and retired because the Czechoslovakia crisis, Manstein basically went out of favor together with him. So they were the 2 guys competing for the same post, and Halder won. So they had been rivals for quite some time. So you have to keep that in mind also for him rejecting the plan. It could have been political reasons, could have been rivalry reasons. Doesn't have to be the case that he actually didn't think the plan wouldn't work. So yeah. I mean, his execution layer, I mean, he was the guy executing Fall Gelb, and that obviously worked great. So once it got going, he obviously knew what he was doing, so. And he was the one that didn't want the stop order. His boss was Brauchitsch, but the actual head of the army doesn't really do a whole lot of planning and executing. That's usually his chief of staff is doing that, and that was Halder. But Halder and Brauchitsch didn't want to stop the Panzers. Rundstedt did that, and Hitler overruled them when they said, no, Rundstedt, you keep going. So Halder wasn't the problem here. Halder was actually executing this pretty well. Okay, now for the actual German plan. When Hitler ordered the plan to attack for Case Red, Dunkirk was still pretty much going on. He had 2 ideas. First of all, Army Group B under Bock had orders to reach the Lower Seine. Lower Seine is basically everything between Paris and the ocean. That was the first phase of the plan. Second phase, once Dunkirk is actually cleaned up and Army Group A is ready again, strong panzer forces are to attack both sides of Reims, basically make a large pincer movement and basically take out all the remaining strong French forces, basically in the triangle of Paris. Where's the other thing? Paris, Belfort, and Metz. So basically this triangle. Metz is over there, Paris is over here, and Belfort is over there. So basically everything in this entire area was supposed to be cut in a pincer movement by Army Group A, if possible pushed against the marginal line and basically trapped, and then the marginal line was supposed to be taken from behind, assisted by Step 3, which was Plan Tiger. First Army was supposed to push into the Saar Gap, which I'll mention in a bit, and if necessary, 7th Army was supposed to attack both sides of Colmar, which is down there. The Saar Gap is a gap in the marginal line that is roughly between Sargemünd and... where's the other one? I think it's over here. I think it's that area here. Reason for that is basically that's a very wet region. So the ground is not really suitable to build large underground bunker structures there. It's just too wet ground. You would have to dry out the entire region to be able to do that. So there was a little bit of a gap there. That was the gap where First Army was supposed to push into. It's not a huge gap. I think it's 30 kilometers or something like that. And it wasn't the major problem in the French defensive system. But now that they were basically surrounded from all sides, if you want to attack, that would be the way to go. And yeah, as I said, 7th Army might want to attack also at Colmar out of the Black Forest across the Rhine and then to both sides of Colmar. So that was the idea. First phase, go towards the Seine with Army Group B. Second phase, attack both sides of Reims, hence the battle that we fought. And then go basically south and try to encircle everything. That's basically the push to Dijon and then for the marginal line. So what we play is basically second phase, a little bit of third phase because we get assistance by the First Army. So that's basically Plan Tiger. Those pioneers coming from the other side, that's Plan Tiger. So that was the plan. And as I said, the French actually thought about, okay, what are the Germans probably going to do? And they anticipated basically exactly this. So they basically knew exactly what the Germans were going to do. So how did this go? Let me actually quickly look into my notes before I go, just in case I forgot something. Oh yeah, by the way, Weygand later said, we defended against, no, we went to war against Germany with a French army from 1918 against a German army from 1939. That showed his pessimistic attitude. It wasn't actually quite that bad. Most of the equipment of the French had so far proven pretty good. The anti-tank guns were pretty good, the tanks weren't bad. The problem is they weren't all used right, they weren't in the right place, and there wasn't enough of it. For example, the French fighter arrived too late, the French anti-tank gun was great, but wasn't in the right places, and most of them weren't distributed. And most of the really good stuff had been thrown into Belgium and wasted there. So, yeah, the equipment of the French army wasn't actually the problem that much. Anything else in here? I think I got everything. Yeah, I think I got all my notes. So let's actually go into the front line. I got rid of the pictures. Then we get rid of the 21st May. And let's start here. So on 5th June, when Case Red began, this was basically the front line. Army Group B under Bock basically had 2 Panzer Corps. They had Hoth with 5th and 7th Panzer Division. 7, as we know, is Rommel. 5th is no longer commanded by Reinhardt. Reinhardt had actually been promoted and he's in charge of an entire Panzer Corps, which is over here. He has 6th and 8th Panzer Division under him, under Guderian, which has also been promoted, and he's now in charge of his own Panzer group, which has 2 Panzer Corps. So Reinhardt and Guderian maybe not only because he was so successful, but because he didn't listen to his group commander anyway, so they gave him his own group. That way he could, there was one level less that he could disobey. But as I said, 4th Army basically had Panzer Corps Hoth, 6th Army had Panzer Corps Heppner and Wittersheim. So 6th Army had basically 4 Panzer Divisions, which are again in Panzer Group Kleist. 4th Army had just 1 Panzer Corps, 5th and 7th. And Guderian was part of Army Group A, and he had 4 Panzer Divisions in Schmidt's and Reinhardt's Panzer Corps. So you can see there isn't really a Schwerpunktbildung this time. Now Army Group A and B basically have an equal amount of tanks. There's also another change here, especially in Guderian's sector. Guderian asks again that he will do the crossing on his own, but the army group commander says nope, or even the army commander says nope, infantry is going to do the crossing, and once they have a bridgehead, then the panzers will exploit it. So they go a little bit more conservative now. Also because they noticed that during the campaign of Yellow, the panzers still don't have the right mix of infantry and tanks. There's still not enough infantry. And the motorized infantry divisions are always lagging behind a little bit. So what they do now is actually make proper Panzer corps. I'm only showing the Panzer divisions in those corps, but almost all those Panzer corps are 2 Panzer divisions and 1 motorized infantry division. So the 2 Panzer divisions always have the support of 1 motorized infantry division. It's actually, if you play Hearts of Iron, that's a really good mixture for going for your core. 2 Panzer, 1 motorized infantry. That's why that's great in that game, because that's actually exactly what the Germans did here. Because that worked. By the way, was that notification sound that I just heard on your end or on mine? No, that's on mine.
I looked, I didn't see anything, so it should be on your side.
Yeah, it's on my side.
But you got me really scared.
Sorry about that. So all these Panzer Corps basically have 1 additional motorized infantry division that I didn't sign here, because I can't sign all the divisions, otherwise you go nuts. But you can keep that in mind. So that's the structural changes that the Germans did here. Again, as I said, it took 2 days until 7th June until they made any kind of breakthrough. First breakthrough happened in the north with Army Group B. So Kleist Panzer Group, Manstein, and 5th and 7th Panzer Division made a breakthrough, which is not surprising since they had bridgeheads there already. So they were going to make a breakthrough there first. Also, all the Allied panzers in that area were basically, not in great shape anymore, as I said, due to the Battle of Abbeville, so there wasn't any strong resistance there anymore. I'm actually going to get rid of the army of the Allied Order of Battle here. As we continue, on 8th June, they basically broke that line completely and had already reached the lower Seine. So, stage 1 of the battle is going fine. The panzers had already reached Rouen. That's where Kleist's group is going. And they had basically already ripped a major gap in the French line and had reached the Seine. On 9th June, this is basically what happens. I try to draw arrows from all the panzer units where they were going. So Wittersheim is reaching here, Höppner is trying to go there. But both Wittersheim and the Höppner's Panzer Corps under Group Kleist are getting stuck here. They run into a pretty strong French defenses. And even though the front line is already pushing further up, as I said, there are these hedgehog positions that these guys can't really deal with. So in the coming days, even though Hoth is reaching Rouen and making a connection there, and guys in Dieppe are gonna get enclosed. As you can see, Hoth is pushing towards the coast and enclosing guys over here. And all this is happening, and finally on this day, basically the entire, what's left of the 10th Army and the British are surrendering in this area. They basically have been cut off. But let's go back a little bit again. These guys over here, the entire Panzer Group Kleist, basically is getting stuck here. They just can't make any headway. So what the German High Command decides is to take them away from this front line, pull them away. So again, not getting stuck and not being able to do something, it may be a good idea to pull those out and put them somewhere else. And that's exactly what they did. They basically, I'm not sure that they put them under a different army command, but they basically changed their entire sector and said, okay, let's forget about this area. We're going to make a breakthrough both sides of Soissons, which is over here, and then go around all this crap and go for Paris from the east. And that's exactly what they did. Meanwhile, Guderian's forces are making headway both sides of Reims. I'm actually thinking he only goes east of it, and I think once Höppner and Wittersheim arrive, they will actually go west of it. So they are already told, okay, they were probably gonna cooperate with Guderian. So I'm pretty sure they actually switched army groups. Not sure. Couldn't figure that out, whether they actually were put up on the same army group as Guderian. But it would make sense because they actually end up cooperating. So in this area it didn't work, so the Germans are putting them somewhere else. As you can see, again, Guderian is making good progress. Reinhardt, as I said last time, he was 5th Panzer Division commander, now he has an entire Panzer Corps, and Schmidt are making good progress and have reached the Marne. Marne, pretty important river in the First World War, as you might remember. Höppner and Wiedersheim have been pulled over here. And I think on this day, yeah, they are actually pushing south and are now in the flank of Schmidt and Reinhardt. As you can see in the RAS scenario, that we have one group going from the east of RAS and one group going from the west of RAS. So it's pretty likely that everything that we have in the east is Panzer Group Guderian, everything that we have in the west is Panzer Group Kleist. So that's the background from RAS, from the RAS scenario. So these guys are pushing south here. Tell me, by the way, if this gets too clustered, I can withdraw some of the earlier days to clean this up a little bit, but I think you can still see what's going on. So this outer green line is basically now the front line on 14th of June. That's basically after the breakthrough, 1 week after that. This is what it looks like. Now that Kleist has been moved east and not trying to break through where they just got stuck, they now have been able to break through and basically keep up with Guderian. And in the west, Höppner, no, not Höppner, Hoth is now with Rommel, and I'm not sure who's commanding the other one. I'm not sure who's commanding the other Panzer Division, but with Rommel, he's basically also across the Seine. And on this day is also where Paris is declared an open city and taken. So now the French line is basically busted. Now it's just a matter of cleaning it all up. So let's keep going. Now this line is already going pretty far forward. That is actually what one book says what these guys did in 1 day. I'm not sure they actually did that. Maybe they arrived there 1 day later, but this is basically what they're going for. They're basically pushing along the river all the way to the Loire already. While Guderian is making progress and pushing with one of his Panzer Corps on the west side of the Marne and with one on the east side of the Marne. Going further, and now Plan Tiger comes into effect. First Army is attacking into the Saar Gap, and 7th Army is attacking past Colmar. And now to support this attack, Guderian is ordered to move part of his forces east, away from the Swiss border, and already make a pincer movement and basically trap everything in the area here behind the marginal line. So on 17th June, 1st Army has already pushed past Metz. I'm not sure Metz has been taken already, but they have basically pushed through. And now, as you can see, while Army Group Kleist is already pushing for Saône and towards Lyon already, Dijon has been taken on this day. Guderian has reached the Swiss border, and part of his forces have already made the curve and are now moving into the marginal line. On 19th of June, he makes the connection with 7th Army in this area. 7th Army is still pushing in there. Looking over here, you can see what Rommel and his buddies are up to. So Hoth has pushed past the Seine. They have taken Le Mans. Whoever is in charge of 5th Panzer Division, I have it on one of these text boxes in a second. He's already going for Rennes, while Rommel at this point is taking Cherbourg. So now the Panzer Divisions are basically split up. One goes in this direction, the other one in there. On 20th of June, now let me check, who was that guy? Lemelson, there we go. On 20th of June, he takes Brest. The Loire has basically been reached on all fronts. Part of Army Group, Panzer Group Kleist is already pushing towards Lyon, while Guderian's forces, now that they've reached the Swiss border, are basically just all going towards the marginal line and completing the encirclement. 21st June, Lyon has been reached. and Lorient has been reached, Saint-Malo has been taken, and on the 22nd, did actually anything happen on the 22nd? I don't think so. So on the 23rd, that's the day where basically all the remnants of the entire Army Group 2, which have all been encircled in this area, including most of the marginal line, surrenders. Because with Guderian, 7th and 1st Army, and 16th Army coming from the north, the normal infantry army, these guys have basically been completely encircled. Now the Germans are just pushing south at their leisure. La Rochelle has been taken. On the 24th, they take the remaining ports. And on the 24th is basically the limit of the German advance. That's the line. And the demarcation line will be this one. On 10th of June also the Italians attacked, but there's not a whole lot to report there because they basically didn't achieve anything. I think they pushed a couple of kilometers in there. Mussolini said he needs at least 1,000 killed Italians to be able to sit on a negotiation table. Actually only 600 and something Italians died, so he didn't get that number, or 800 and something, but he didn't get 1,000. And he actually didn't get anything out of the negotiations. The Germans made their own peace with France. Italy had to make its own peace treaty with France, so a combined negotiation never took place. Hitler wasn't interested in that, and Italy actually wanted Nizza, but Hitler didn't say nope. You're not getting that. Nice or Nizza is not going to be on your side. So the Italians basically only got a 3-kilometer or 5-kilometer area into the borderline fortifications in the Swiss Alps, in the French Alps, and that's all they got. They were allowed to occupy that, but other than that, they didn't get anything out of the war. So this is a whole bunch of arrows. I think way more than you had, Barkada.
Yeah, but it's fine.
So, in case anybody has any questions about this, where anybody was or where anybody was going or what the idea was behind this, you can tell me. Basically, I can tell you one more thing. Army Group A, once they pushed past Esne, Hitler was constantly interfering. If you read Halder's daily reports, he's basically getting frustrated. Only because things are still going fine, he's asking himself whether he should laugh or cry about this much interference. Hitler thinks first, nah, we're gonna push southwest in case there's a counterattack there. He still expects some magical counterattack coming from somewhere, and then finally he agrees to going actually southeast and encircling the marginal line. So he's constantly telling everybody to go first one direction, then the other direction. So if some of this movement looks a little chaotic, sometimes that's also due to Hitler's interference and constantly sending everybody in different directions. But basically the plan works. Army Group B got across the lower Seine and then basically pushed into taking all the channel ports and all the Atlantic ports. And Army Group A basically breaks through the Aisne and then encircles the marginal line area, basically. That was basically what they were trying to do. And once that's the case, Army Group C was going to help breaking through the marginal line and complete the encirclement from all sides. Which is what I said in the scenario, if the counterattack from the other side is missing, if I'm missing those auxiliary forces, Plan Tiger is missing. That was actually a pretty important part of Case Red. So taking that out of the scenario makes it very unhistorical. That attack is supposed to happen. Fun fact, that was supported by railguns, just as we have them in the scenario. And where I live, the house next to my parents' house was an old train station. I have a rail line right behind my house, which is now only used by a private company. It's not used by the German rail system anymore. But on that rail, there was actually a German railgun firing across the marginal line. My grandfather told me that. So one of those things was basically parked directly behind my parents' house. So I knew where those things were. Yeah. So in case anybody has any questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I'm going to switch in the last 15 minutes that Dracula can be here
had a question
to the development of the Panzer divisions. Yes. It's clearly over by then. What was the chain of command issue on surrendering? As I said, on 10th of June, Weygand, the commander-in-chief, already suggested it, but the government was not a major favor of it. When it turned out that this was not going anywhere, by the way, what I forgot to mention, there's also a second BEF, a second British Expeditionary Force landing here, but I didn't mention it because I didn't do anything, basically. They didn't arrive anywhere to do anything. And I don't mean the British forces that were still over here. Those were still part of the first BEF. They were just not in the trap. The second BEF didn't arrive in time, took too long to deploy, and by the time they were deployed, they weren't able to do anything anymore, and their commander was basically a moron because he didn't even get his evacuation right, which was again an evacuation of yet another British Expeditionary Force, and that was such a chaos that he again left most of his heavy equipment behind. That's basically all he achieved. So that was a bit of a disaster. Regarding surrender, yeah, I mean, it's a democracy. Until the government decides to go for surrender negotiations, it takes a couple of days. So from the actual breakthroughs through, okay, we're gonna talk about it, and until the Germans respond, I think on 15th of June or something like that, they put out their first feelers. By the 20th or so, I think they signed, and by the 25th it took effect. So it takes a while. But and yeah, they were still thinking about certain things. Like they were thinking about first falling behind the Seine. Weygand didn't support that. He even actively didn't follow orders or advice from the head of government, which made the head of government look bad in his parliament, which made other things not great. Yeah, there was a lot of chaos in the political leadership at the time also. Renault then stepped back. That's what put Pétain into power, which is the Vichy France leader. There was French plans to potentially move the government to North Africa, to Algeria, and continue the fight from there and not surrender. Whether that would have been such a great idea is a question, because they didn't have any supplies there, they didn't have any stockpiles there, and that would have probably meant that the Germans would have occupied the entirety of France and possibly even not treat the French so great to force the French government to surrender or something. I don't know whether that would have worked. Might have been a consequence that the German Africa Corps would have pushed into Algeria instead of into Egypt. You never know what that would have meant, whether that would even possible. Churchill even suggested a French-British union at this point. Renault was actually suggesting that, but because he had been made look bad by Weygand in front of the parliament, he didn't have the support of his own government anymore, which is basically why he stepped down. So basically the political system was breaking apart at this point also. That's why they maybe sued for peace a little bit later than they should have. But again, this was basically what Weygand a little bit pushed for. He made a stand at the line, and once the line was gone, he basically didn't have any contingency plans anymore. So that's why every idea that the government still had to make a last stand somewhere, Weygand basically blocked all that. So there was still a lot of back and forth until they finally decided to sue for a peace. And Renault never wanted to go for a ceasefire. That's why Pétain got put into place when Renault stepped down, because Renault wasn't willing to do that. He wanted to keep fighting. So Pétain took over and signed, and Hunziker, by the way, if I go back to the Allied Order of Battle, Hunziker is basically commander of Army Group 4 by now. Before he was 2nd Army commander, then he also got promoted to take part of this entire army group. He's the guy that is signing the armistice in that famous rail wagon. where the Germans had to sign their armistice in 1918. What were the casualties in the first part of this invasion compared to the second part? As I said, I don't have exact numbers, but in terms of percentages, I don't know about the French. But in terms of the Germans took about 47% of their losses in the first part, which means they took 53% in the second part. In terms of the British, that one I know. The British lost 4,000 men at the evacuation. I think at the second evacuation of the second BEF, due to bombing, they bombed and destroyed one ship and killed 4,000 men. And from what I know, that doubled in one go. It doubled the British losses in the entire campaign. Before they had lost about 2,000, about 4,000 as well. So that added another 4,000 without achieving much for it. So about the French, I don't know. But the Germans certainly took a bloodier nose on the second part than they took on the first. So, any other questions? By the way, this is online. Let me actually give you the link, guys. I totally forgot about that. You can play around with this map on your own. I actually paid for this website. That's where your Patreon money is going. It costs me $100 a year to be able to play around with this site. I think I will use it from now on because I think it's actually pretty well done, pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Casualties seem so low compared to battles that come later. Oh yeah, absolutely. While there were still some high losses here, I think the Germans lost a couple 100,000 or something like that. Maybe 150,000, something like that. Maybe 200, I don't know. So they had losses, not much compared to stuff in the First World War. That's also why how they justified it. Like, if you think the cost of this victory were high, consider what we lost in the First World War without winning. Which is the way you can look at it, I guess. After this, parts of the army were even demobilized. There were victory celebrations. The Luftwaffe basically took a vacation. They restationed themselves here along the Channel Coast and basically took a summer vacation. Because people basically expected the war to be over. That the British would sue for peace sooner or later, because why the fuck would you keep fighting? Didn't turn out to be that way. Also, nobody knew about Hitler's plans for Russia yet. But this is basically when Hitler's prominence is basically on an all-time high. Even people that were not in favor of the regime are now at least appreciative of this victory. So at this point, he's basically untouchable. Oh, sorry, Carol Wolfpub, but as always, there is a recording, so... And as I just said, the map that I'm using here is online, the link that I just posted. In case you didn't get that, in case you joined right after I posted it, let me post it again. You can play around with that, so if you have any questions later, you can still ask me. I'm probably going to be around for a little bit. But just as I said, in case nobody has any questions right now, I'm actually going to move on to the development of the Panzer divisions between 1939, 1940, and 41. One thing I wanted to mention, because it's related to that, a ton of the firepower that the Germans will have available in Russia is coming from this captured equipment. Well, they're not necessarily using tanks in their Panzer divisions. They actually are using a couple of captured tanks in secondary scenarios like Yugoslavia, so that we actually have a Samoa tank under our command might even be realistic. I'm not sure where they were deployed, but they were used there. But they didn't use them in their main Panzer divisions in Russia. But they were using French chassis for their first tank destroyers, the first Marder types, and artillery, self-propelled artillery. They used a ton of other French equipment, I'm sure, anti-tank guns and all kinds of other crap. And the most important contribution might have been the trucks. They were able to motorize a whole bunch of additional infantry divisions. They introduced a whole lot more motorized infantry divisions. And of course, they doubled the number of Panzer divisions from 10 to 20 in time for Barbarossa. So that's, again, a whole bunch of trucks. Remember back in the day where I made that presentation, what a Panzer division actually looks like. Remember how many trucks that were per division? Germany has a big problem with producing that many trucks and producing the spare parts for them. So they captured a whole bunch of trucks here. And that made them capable of motorizing a whole bunch more of their army. They would certainly have looked a lot different in Russia if they hadn't had all this captured equipment. Not to mention all the fuel and oil and all that other stuff they would capture here. So their entire supply and resource situation was a lot better after this. What percent of infantry were mobilized in 1940? What do you mean mobilized? Do you mean mobilized or motorized? Motorized, not a whole lot. I think the French said in the book that they have about 70 divisions left and are facing 140 German divisions. I think out of those 140, maybe, I don't know, there were 10 Panzer divisions. I guess another 10 motorized infantry divisions, maybe. I'm not sure it's the exact number, it's something around that ballpark. So not a whole lot, maybe 10% or something of the entire infantry army is motorized. Not a whole lot. The German army was mainly horse-driven, not motorized. The motorized ones are the elite divisions. That is not a big part of the army. For good reason. Germany doesn't have the fuel and it doesn't have the spare parts, and it can't even keep up with production of the trucks. Right before this, there was actually a demotorization effort ordered by Halder, because the German army the German production couldn't keep up. Remember, the German industrial production will not go into war economy until 1942. For whatever reason, we're still in Germany is still working at a peace economy. Later also slave labor will come into play to compensate for that and all that kind of stuff. But so playing with trucks is ahistorical. No. We're playing a Panzer Corps. The Panzer divisions were motorized. Those infantries did have trucks. In fact, some of them already have half tracks. I will go into that once I say what our Panzer division is supposed to look like in the future. Because one of our infantry units is actually allowed to have half tracks. I'm talking about the rest of the army, which is not the one we're playing. Those would be auxiliary forces or stuff like that. The units that we play are fully motorized, but they're not a big part of the actual army. There's only 10 Panzer divisions right now. In Russia, it will be 20. But 20 divisions out of, I don't know how many divisions the Germans have by then, but in France, they had 140 by the time Case Red started. What's 10 divisions out of the 140? That's not a whole lot. Even if you add the motorized infantry divisions, then maybe, I don't know how many they had, between 5 and 10, maybe 15 if it's really much, but I don't think they had that many. It makes 20 divisions that are fully motorized. 20 out of 140. Not a whole lot. So, let me actually go into the Panzer divisions. I'm going by an example of the 2nd Panzer divisions. Before 1942, they're actually still not standardized. You also have to keep in mind the ones that Prakata is playing. What are you playing, the 7th and the 8th, right?
No, 8th and 10th.
8th and 10th. Well, the 8th I know, 1940. Yeah, the 8th, I'm pretty sure, has Czech tanks.
Yep, that's the one. And I still have them, so I really tried to copy them exactly.
Yeah, Rommel also had Czech tanks. Still, he's the 7th, and I'm pretty sure the 10th. Let me actually check.
The 10th actually is pretty good, so...
no, the 10th is normal one, yeah. The 10th is actually pretty... yeah, the 8th Panzer Division has 38 Ts. The 10th Panzer Division has Panzer 3s.
Yeah, and they have the good ones.
Yeah, they have only the good ones. They have only the 5 centimeter ones. I looked it up across the Panzer divisions. They either have the 38Ts, one Panzer division even has still the 35T. Poor 6th Panzer division. But the ones that have Panzer 3s usually, on average, have about twice as many 5cm as 3.7cm. So for every Panzer 3F that we're using, we're allowed to take 2 newer ones. So it should be a 2-to-1 average. In terms of Panzer IVs, you will read that the Panzer IV-D was serving well into 1943 still, but you have to keep in mind those are not the same Panzer IV-Ds that we had in France. After France, they up-armored all of those. So everything that comes out of the factory is a Panzer IV-G or H or whatever, but that doesn't mean that the Panzer IV-Ds are still the same. They're basically up-armoring them, so they basically armored the same. They're just not new models out of the factory, they're old models that are upgraded. So they're still calling them 4D, but they're upgraded 4Ds. So that's why I say, since the only difference in the game between those two models is actually that the ground defense is higher, that basically represents the armor. So it makes no sense to hold on to the 4Ds. The old ones with the bad ground defense don't exist anymore by 1941. Even though you might still see D models, but they're up-armored D models. And since we can't represent up-armored D models in the game, we're basically allowed to upgrade all Panzer IVs. But we should still keep some Panzer III Fs around, because there were some 3 and even some Panzer II still. But those are...
it depends on the composition. So I really try to model the 8th and the 10th exactly. On the downside, I still have the Panzer II, and I still have the 38Ts, but at least I have the good Panzer IIIs.
Yeah, there's also a fact, most of the Panzer divisions that were still using the Czech tanks had actually 3 battalions instead of 2. So, yeah, and they have a larger number of tanks. So, I guess that would mean that you're allowed to overstrength your Panzer 38s, I guess.
Maybe, but it doesn't really matter at the moment.
Yeah, if you want to, you don't have to. But you, I'd say if you go for the 38T with a strength of 12 instead of 10, that would be historical. The other ones not so much, because the Panzer 3 and 4 were still lacking in numbers, kind of. So overstrengthening those doesn't really make sense. But the 38Ts, absolutely. Also, in 1941, I'm not sure when we'll get them available in the game, but by the time Barbarossa starts, we can have a Flampanzer, because those units were established and sent to the front then. There were actually 3 active Flampanzer units, and there was even one French Panzer unit. I'm not sure where that was actually assigned, but it existed. But it was not part of a Panzer division. It was an independent unit. So we can have 1 Flampanzer by the start of the Russian campaign. Not yet, until now, not in Greece, not in Yugoslavia, but once we go into Russia, we can have 1 Flampanzer. So, yeah, I wanted to go over a little bit of the layout. Let me actually go by the example of the 8th Panzer Division.
Do you have a graphical representation?
Of what? Of the number of tanks?
Yep. So, because we still have the map on, and
you shouldn't have the map on.
No, we don't. My stream is a little bit wonky. Yeah, now I see.
Yeah, I gotta answer a question here. Richard Martin, so all active infantry divisions did have trucks? No. The motorized infantry divisions had trucks. Those are maybe 10% of all the infantry divisions. A regular infantry division, like 12th Army over here, those were just regular infantry divisions. Those have just horses. Those don't have any trucks at all. So 90% of the German army doesn't have trucks, they have horses. They're still horse-drawn crap. Only the elite stuff, the motorized infantry divisions and the panzer divisions. Motorized infantry divisions will later be renamed Panzer Grenadiers, but that's all the difference will be. It's just a change of name for propaganda reasons. The motorized infantry divisions have trucks, panzer divisions have trucks, normal infantry divisions do not have trucks. So quick review, 3 tank units, 3 infantry, 3 artillery, 1 pack gun, and blah 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 blah. No. 4 infantry. There's more infantry than tanks. Let me actually go into this. Let me go into this for an example. Well, I can't do 8th Panzer Division because in Poland there wasn't an 8th Panzer Division. But let me go by the example of the 4th, maybe. So the 4th in 1939, and in 40, and in 41. So, first of all, you can see that in 1939, a panzer unit, panzer battalion, basically was supposed to have 1 medium company and 2 light companies. Except for 1st Panzer Division, most of them didn't have a medium company yet, so that's why I will ignore that. Instead, they had a replacement kind of unit, which was the light company variant A. They did that because they just didn't have enough tanks to give everybody a medium unit. What did that look like? So, this one, actually, I need. So on the top left here, you can see the light company from 1939. In 1940, that switched to the medium company in 1940. And in 1941, they got the medium company model 1941. So they redesigned basically what such a company was supposed to have. And if you look at how that developed, you can see that in 1939, they basically had 6 Panzer IVs and 3 Panzer IIIs and a whole bunch of Panzer Is. You can see that is already improving in 1940 because now they actually have a light platoon of Panzer IIs instead of Panzer Is, and now they already have 7 Panzer IVs. In 1941, that's actually the medium company, as it was already specified in 1939, but 1939 nobody actually was able to get that because it didn't have enough Panzer IVs. In 1941 they get closer to that. Now they actually have 3 full platoons of 4 Panzer IVs and still the light platoon with Panzer II. So now in 1941 they're finally getting to the point where a medium company is supposed to look like what it's supposed to look like. You seeing that, Ruck?
Yep, it's there.
So the light company, in 1939, yeah, it was basically just ones of Panzer Is and Panzer IIs and a couple Panzer IIIs. It's not really interesting to look at that because the specification for the light company is basically identical with the one from 1941, which is pointless because that's not the thing any Panzer division had, because they didn't have that many Panzer IIIs. So you can basically forget about the specification. They had a whole bunch of Panzer IIs and 1s and maybe a couple of Panzer IIIs. Considering the amount of tanks that they had, and also that they wanted to double them from 5 to 10, the Panzer divisions, they modified the light company in 1940 to look like the one you can see here on the left. You can still see there's still some Panzer Is in there, Panzer IIs, but at least 2 platoons of 3 Panzer IIIs each. That's still not a whole bunch of Panzer IIIs, though. If you compare that to the one they wanted to give them in 1941, you can see that that is actually looking more like what it's supposed to look like. So in 1941, we're actually getting closer to actually having proper Panzer divisions. 1940, there was still a lot of compromises. So if you look at the Panzer units again, you can see 1 light A, 2 normal lights per battalion, 4 battalions per per division. If you go 1940, we still have 4 battalions, 1 medium, 2 lights. If you go into 1941, things change around a little bit. Now, in 1941, depending on what Panzer division you look like, the number of platoons changes, and some of the units have 3 light companies, but only 2 platoons, and some have 3 companies, but 3 platoons. So they're still experimenting here with layouts. And then, of course, you have the Panzer divisions that have the 38T, and those look completely different. Those usually have 3 platoons of 1 medium, and which are made up of Panzer IVs, and the light companies are made up of Panzer 38s instead of Panzer IIIs. So they're not really fully standardized on that yet, but they're getting there. There's more of the heavier tanks. There's the better Panzer IIIs. 2/3 of those have the 5cm gun, not the long one yet. That's not the L60 yet. That's the short 5cm. L60 will come later. It's the longer 5cm gun. We don't have that yet, but we have the short 5cm gun. Some of them have still the 3.7cm gun, which by now is completely inadequate, but at least twice as many 5cm. And the mediums are still Panzer IVs, and these are the new Panzer IVs. You also have to keep in mind what type of Panzer IV this is. These are the better ones. In Poland, we even had the Panzer IVC, which was really badly armored. I think that only had 15cm of armor. The D, I think, had 30cm, and the new ones have 50cm or even more. So the Polish one was so badly armored that we don't even have it in the game because it would be completely crap. Would have been basically not much better armored than the Panzer II. So that's how the Panzers changed. They changed the number of companies around a little bit. In some areas they changed the number of platoons. This is actually not a standard one. The 4 companies is an outlier. I think only 2, the 4th and the 10th Panzer divisions looked like this. No, the 7th also, but the 7th also has Czech tanks. So in terms of normal Panzer IIIs, they had the 4th Panzer division with 3 companies, which also makes sense because they only had the 3.7cm Panzer IIIs. So that makes sense that they had more light divisions to make up for that, light companies to make up for that. The 10th Panzer Division, however, also has 4 light companies, and they have full 105s. So why they needed more, I don't know, but they had more. Also, these are still not fully stocked. What I just showed you was a model that they were supposed to have. They're still not missing some stuff. They're still filling up stuff with Panzer IIs. But almost none of the Panzer Division still has Panzer Is. Only the 9th Panzer Division has still 8 of them, but almost none of the Panzer Divisions are still using Panzer Is. Those are refitted into Panzerjägers or into self-propelled anti-tank guns like the Bison tank, the Sturmpanzer, that kind of stuff. The more interesting thing is actually how the infantry changed. If you look at that, if you look at the early infantry, well, this is a bad example. Let me look at the 4th Panzer Division. Nope. All divisions that have not enough infantry. No, that was actually right. Let me stay there. Yeah, here we only have 2 platoons of infantry. Plus 1 Kratzschützen platoon, which is missing here. Obviously, that was not really great. We noticed that's not a good mixture. That's too much tanks, not enough infantry. Another thing is, as you will note, that, well, this is actually a bad example because they already have that. Let me go into the 2nd Panzer Division, for example. You can see that each company has 9 machine guns, 2 heavy machine guns, and 3 mortars. If you look at 1940, some of the Panzer Divisions, as you can see over here, some of them still look like that. Some have already doubled their machine guns. And by the time we reach 1941, basically every infantry company now has twice the number of machine guns. So they massively upgraded the firepower of the infantry. So one of the infantry units may be the same infantry unit, but they have much more firepower. They also took out the Pioneer unit in 1940. They already, in some cases, made that a separate unit that is not part of the heavy company anymore, but a separate unit under the platoon command, and that will continue on. That will move even further up. It will first move back into the heavy company, then out again, and then it will even be an additional Pioneer unit at the regiment level. So they're still figuring out, okay, where exactly do we need the support units? Another thing that you will see change in 1940 to 1941. In 1940, you see that in some cases, this little company of assault guns, that's the Sturmpanzer unit, but it's only 1 company. That will be attached nearly everywhere. To every regiment will get one of those by 1941. It's still not enough from our perspective to actually warrant using that unit, but it will be replaced later by the Stugs anyway. What changes in 1941 is that almost every Panzer division now has a Kratzschützen unit and 4 infantry units. while the Panzer units are reduced to sometimes 2 platoons, sometimes 3. So basically, by 1941, it has switched completely around, where you before had 4 Panzer units and only 2 infantry units. Now you have 2 Panzer units and 5 infantry units, 4 regular 1 and 1 Kreuzschützen. By 1942, the Kreuzschützen will be gone. They will be put under the brigade, infantry brigade command, mostly for reconnaissance reasons. They're not really a platoon anymore, but there's still just enough justification for them to still be around and be used as a recon unit in the game, but they're not really part of a regular fighting unit anymore. It's become obvious that they're a little too weak in firepower, so they're basically being used for recon purposes by the brigade. What will also happen in 1942, the machine gun company, that's this 4th company that you see in there with the heavy machine guns and the mortars, and the heavy mortar, not the medium mortars. The Germans will make their experience. They already made that experience in France, but it will be confirmed in 1941 in Russia that usually bunching up all those mortars and heavy machine guns in one place is usually not what's actually happening. Usually those are handed out piecemeal to the individual companies to support them at whatever they're doing, and that will make it necessary in 1942 to get rid of the machine gun company and instead spread that equipment around in the actual companies. So that will either move up to be under command of the regiment or actually be distributed in the companies, which will make the companies themselves even higher in firepower. So instead of 2 heavy machine guns, each company will then have 4 heavy machine guns, which you can see over here in the 1942 model. The heavy company will stick around. In 1942 they will also get anti-tank rifles, but they will basically keep having a pioneer unit, a infantry gun unit, and an anti-tank unit. If you look at the artillery, as we could see in 1939, we only had 2 artillery units. Brockett was very distressed about that, so was I. That is changed by 1940 in some Panzer divisions. Some still have only 2, but some already get the 150 centimeter gun. By 1941, that is pretty much standardized, and by 1942, they even get a 4th platoon, but that 4th platoon is not actually artillery. That's 1 company of 20mm anti-aircraft and 2 companies of 88s. So basically by that time, the regular 88 unit that we have is actually a platoon, so a regular unit of the Panzer Division under the artillery regiment. The anti-tank units will still have some 20mm anti-tank guns and those anti-aircraft guns, and those will be actually self-propelled. So if we ever decide to, maybe have some self-propelled anti-air, even though that's only a company, we could potentially justify that maybe as being part of the anti-tank unit, but I think that in the later years that is even upgraded to an entire platoon, so I think that's the time when we can invest in that. But having an 88 as part of the Panzer Division is already justified by 1942. But it's still possible to use it in 1941 because they were just attached and used left and right and center all over the place. As I said, those are basically the units that stopped most of the French armored counterattacks. But in 1942 they will actually be part of the Panzer divisions, a regular part. Everything else is basically that most of the stuff gets self-propelled, some get armored transports. If you look in 1941 up here in the infantry, the thing marked with green here is the ones that have armored personnel carriers, so the half-tracks. So the 4th Panzer Division, as you can see, has only 1 company in the entire brigade. But for example, the 1st Panzer Division has 2 of their entire platoons. But that's the 1st Panzer Division. They get the new stuff a little bit earlier. But that was not the regular thing. Most of them had 1 company only. So if you see all these propaganda movies of the half-tracks running around, if you look at how many companies that are over all these 4 battalions, only 1 company has half tracks most of the time. But I'm still giving us the benefit of the doubt and saying we're one of the elite guys. So I say we can have an entire platoon in half tracks, which is justified. One Panzer Division actually did that, the 1st Panzer Division. I don't know actually whether... Oh yeah, the 10th Panzer Division. So your guys also have one entire platoon. Yeah, so I have 1st Panzer Division, you have 10th Panzer Division. So we both officially have a Panzer Division that had an entire platoon in half tracks. So one of our infantry guys can be in a half track, but only one. Germany didn't have that many half tracks. So in terms of the rest, I don't think there's a whole bunch that changed. The Pioneers, one of the Pioneer units got, one company got half tracks. But again, that's just one company. That doesn't justify us making the entire thing have half tracks. Oh yeah, the anti-tank units got some 5 centimeters. Usually, I don't know, it was half. Half 5 centimeter, half 3.7 centimeter. Obviously, since we can't have half, since it's just one unit in our case, we can upgrade our towed anti-tank units to half 5 centimeter. Yeah, for example, this Panzer Division only has 5 centimeter. So these 12, this new symbol here, that represents a 5 centimeter anti-tank gun. So most of them upgraded to 5 centimeter. Still not standardized.
To sum it up, so should we reduce the number of tanks now, actually?
No. Well, depends on how many you have. Each Panzer Division should have 3 platoons. I mean, not everyone had it. Most of them had only 2 platoons, but there were also still Panzer Divisions that had 4 platoons. There were some Panzer Divisions that had 3 platoons, so I'm still going for the gold middle, and I'll give us 3 platoons. If we don't use 3 platoons, we'll also not get a proper mix of Panzer 4s and 3s, because we should have twice as many Panzer 3s as we have Panzer 4s, and that's hard to do with 2. So I'll go for 3. That's the thing that makes the most historical sense. 2 Panzer 3s, 1 Panzer 4. In your case, 2 Panzer 38Ts, 1 Panzer 4. If you want to use a Panzer 2 for now, still addition on that, you can do that. But by 1941, once we go into Russia, I would upgrade that to a Flammpanzer. I would
sure, but at the moment we are having much more tanks.
Do you? I don't. I have 3 per division.
No, you have more. You have more tanks than me.
Do I?
Yeah. You have more tanks than me, and I have, I think, 7 tank units plus 1 Panzer.
I don't think so. I have 7 Panzers. I have 3 per division plus 1 Panzer II.
Sure?
Yeah. That's because I already planned Belgrade, so I know what I have. I have 1 additional tank. That's the Panzer II. And I'm keeping that because I want to upgrade it for a Flammpanzer. I'm not deploying it.
Because I think I have 2 Panzer 38T, 1 4 and 1 3.
Yeah, I have 2 Panzer 3s that are SE. I have the Gift 38T. That's 1 division. Then I have the other one that was a Panzer 1, a Panzer 2, a Panzer 4, and a Panzer 3. That's the other division. The Panzer 1 I upgraded to a Panzer 4. So now I have 2 Panzer 4s, 1 for each division. 2 Panzer 3s for each division, and a Panzer 2. No. 1 of the Panzer 3s of the division is the 38T. So I have 3 Panzer 3s, 1 38T, that's the 4 light ones, 2 Panzer 4s, that's 1 for each, and on top 1 Panzer 2. So 7 tanks. I got 1 SE tank on top of that in Belgrade, yes, but I disbanded that one. That was my 8th, but I disbanded that one.
Yeah, I planned for 4 tank units, but it's fine. I didn't deploy all of them anyways because you can do that. You shouldn't deploy them. What we can do is because we will have more tanks in the future, but in the Panzer divisions we will have 6, 3 for each Panzer division. Then we can have 1 Flammpanzer on top of that, and once we get the Tiger, we can have heavy battalions, which are independent units. So we can have like 2 or 3 Tigers. Sure.
So something like that. But the Panzer divisions should be 3 each. So 6 tanks for the Panzer divisions, 2 Panzer 3s, 1 Panzer 4. And the occasional 38T in replacement of a Panther 3. Depends on how long you want to hold on to those. I think by 1941 they're still fine. By 1942 we should probably get rid of those.
Yeah, that's the plan.
So I think we're good in terms of tanks. I mean, if you have
the 8th division, and the problem is they had really a lot of 38Ts, but they had a lot of Panzer 3s and a lot of Panzer 4s. So my mix was 2 38T, 1 Panzer 4, 1 Panzer 3. So that's 4.
Yeah, it depends on how you do that.
Because it's impossible to represent the mix otherwise.
Yeah, the mix is down to the platoon level. So it's actually a mix in the platoon, because the mix is actually on the company level.
Yeah, sure.
But so that's impossible to represent anyway.
But for us to represent that.
But the as long as we keep the relative numbers right, so twice as many Panzer 3s and 38Ts for each Panzer 4, I think that should work out. If you have some on top of that, as I said, if you use mostly 38Ts, a certain overstrength in tanks is justified anyway, because they had more of those, because they knew they were weaker, so they gave them more tanks. So if you have a unit that has 38Ts, then I guess you can have one more in there. We just shouldn't overdo it, because you can clearly see in 1941 that they had 2 to 3 platoons of tanks and 5 platoons of infantry if you count if you also count the Kreuzschützen. So they have really pushed towards infantry, which I said earlier. In France, they noticed for Case Red that the Panzer divisions didn't have enough infantry, and the motorized infantry divisions that could have supported them usually weren't there when they needed them. So they, for 1941, they increased the number of infantry in the Panzer divisions by a lot. So we should definitely have more infantry than tanks per division.
Yeah, that's always the case anyways, because
as long as you have one more infantry unit than you have tanks, it should be fine.
Yeah, you can't use that many tanks anyway, so
yeah,
I think we are fine.
So if we have one more infantry unit deployed per division than we have tanks deployed, we should be good. Of course, we can deploy 10 Panzers and 11 infantry. That would work also, but then we don't have any support units anymore. So, but we will be limited to 3 artillery. As I said, the 4th platoon in the artillery was actually 88s, so those will join the actual anti-tank divisions. In terms of other support divisions, as I said, we can have 1 Plum Panzer, just 1, because there were only 3 battalions in existence in the entire front. But we can have those. We can have Stugs. I couldn't figure out what was the actual number of Stugs per division, because again, they weren't assigned to the divisions. They were independent artillery units, completely independent, and they were just sent wherever they were needed. Usually actually supporting infantry divisions, not panzer divisions, but at the end, they basically supported everyone. So I'd say right now we can have 1 artillery Stug per division. An artillery Stug. Later, we can upgrade the Panzerjägers to anti-tank Stugs also, and I would also say 1 per division, because those things existed in such vast numbers. They were the most built machine the Germans had. We can basically throw a little bit of those at our core, and it still won't look bad, because those things were basically everywhere. Beyond that, we can't have anti-tank Stugs or anything like that in the Panzer divisions. The Panzer Division anti-tank units were still mostly towed, but they got some self-propelled stuff, but those were only mortars. The later stuff that they had was Hetzers. So except for mortars and until 1944 the Hetzer, or actually the Jagdpanther 38T, Hetzer is an invented name, those are the only things that we can have in the actual Panzer divisions. Any heavier stuff will be heavy anti-tank battalions. Those existed, but not a whole lot of them. So stuff like Jagdpanther, Jagdtiger, Elephant, Nashorn, anything like that. We can only have 1, maybe 2. But if we have two, then only one of those can be the heaviest crap. The other one would have to be a lighter thing. So we could maybe have one Jagd Tiger and one Jagd Panther, but not two Jagd Tigers. That's just not realistic. There were not that many of those around. So we should be careful with that. Also, not overdo it in Tigers. I think 3 Tigers per corps would probably be the maximum. And we probably should not upgrade all of those to Tiger 2s. We should be careful with the heavy stuff. That was really, really low number stuff. So our Panzer divisions will actually use mortars, which will be interesting because I think both of us don't use mortars all that much.
Nope. Never used them.
So we will have to be a little bit more inventive with how we use them.
So back to the anti-tank units.
Yes.
So we actually should have 2 Panzerjägers total? Because I only have 1.
Well, you can. As I said, the Panzerjägers themselves were actually not used in that much numbers, so that you only have 1 of those is fine. I'm just saying once we go for anti-tank Stugs, we definitely can have 2. Since I already have 2, I will upgrade both of them. But if you want to buy a second one once we get to the Stugs, you certainly can. Simply because the Stugs were used in such vast numbers.
Yeah, sure, but it's an experience problem.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to buy a Panzerjäger, you can certainly do that. Those things were rare, but not so rare that it wouldn't be justified having a second one. Certainly not in Russia, because they tried to deploy as many anti-tank improvised crap as they could in Russia. But we will also get Marder, the first variant of the Marder, soon, I think. I'm not sure when that is actually coming out. So either you wait for the first Marder and then upgrade that to a Stug. I don't know how you're going to do it, but we will certainly...
Yeah, I don't plan to do that because I want to really keep my units together, and the Panzerjäger is not part of the division.
No, it wouldn't be either way. The Stugs are not part of the divisions. They were all attached units, no matter whether they were artillery or anti-tank.
Sure. So I really try to represent that in the naming of my units, and so I don't want to switch between Marder and Stug because that doesn't match.
Yeah, it doesn't match. The Marders were for the Panzer divisions, the Stugs were not. Simply because the Marders were actually anti-tank units. The Stugs were always artillery guys. They were always under artillery command. Even the anti-tank versions were artillery units. The guys that sat in Stugs were not Panzer drivers. They were not Panzer men. They were artillery men. The absolute elite, they were at least considering themselves to be the elite of the artillery, but they were artillery guys. They were not anti-tank guys of the Panzer divisions. They didn't wear Panzer uniforms. So that's also why Guderian was completely against the concept of the Stugs, because he wanted all the armored vehicles and all the production of armored vehicles to go to the Panzer units. He didn't like the idea of the Stug, which shows you that he didn't basically have any clue what he was talking about, because the Stugs were the most successful thing in the entire war. They were supposed to support mostly the infantry because the infantry lacked close support weapons. But they could, of course, also... That's the problem. In the game, we kind of support our Panzers with the Stugs, but in reality, the Panzers didn't need Stugs because the Panzer IV was the support tank. In the Panzers, the Panzer III was the main battle tank, and the Panzer IV was already supporting that. If there was an anti-tank nest somewhere or something, the Panzer IV was the one taking it out. So the Panzers didn't need Stugs, technically. The infantry needed the Stug to take out machine gun nests and stuff like that. So it's a little weird. In the game, we kind of support everything with the Stugs. In reality, they actually supported the normal infantry divisions, but... it's still justified because they were basically everywhere, and in the end they ended up supporting everybody, no matter where they were needed. Once they were turned into the anti-tank role, which didn't mean that you still couldn't shoot high explosive grenades out of those guns. You still could, and they were still engaging machine gun nests and stuff like that. But they were also going more for anti-tank duty, simply because the Russians had so many tanks. But then the infantry demanded to put the close support weapons on half-tracks and on all other crap, because they needed as many of those close support weapons as they could have. That's why the Stug was also built in such vast numbers, because they basically just needed them.
Well, there's one question left. We now have the Nebelwerfer available. I read on that, and it was used in Barbarossa, but not before.
Yeah, the reason why it was not used before...
Not the Wurframens, it's the actual towed version.
The actual towed version.
15 centimeter, I think.
I know that eventually, for example, the Großdeutschland division had a 4th artillery platoon that had Nebelwerfers. I'm not sure it's justified that we have one in the division, but I'd say it's justified that because they were basically at around the numbers that Flammenpanzers were around. So I'd say one in the core would work. I wouldn't put them as regular units into the divisions, but I think one as a support unit should work. For example, I'm also going to buy a bridge engineer for Belgrade and put him into my core. So a number of these support units we can certainly have. The Nebelwerfer units were support units that were used for specific purposes, just like the Flammenpanzer units. The reason why they weren't used before 1941 is they were actually used, but not as rocket launchers. As the name says, the Nebelwerfer units were there to werf Nebel. To basically smoke. They also were originally intended to not just throw smoke, but potentially also poison gas. But later they figured out, hey, we can actually use these things to also throw rockets. So that's why they are called Nebelwerfer, which just means smoke thrower. That is not necessarily a term to keep secret what they were really doing, but that is what they were originally doing. If it's a secretive name, then yes, because it's secret, so you don't know they might throw poison gas at you. It's not secret, so you don't know they throw rockets at you, because originally that wasn't even a concept. They just figured out that they could do that later once the rockets had been developed. Originally, that was not their purpose. So before 1941, they didn't actually have any rockets to throw. They were throwing, smoke, which is still a useful thing in war. You still can shield your troops with it. But they didn't actually become the devastating units until 1941, when the Germans figured out that they could actually throw rockets, which then inspired the Russians to build the Katyusha launcher. So they came up with their own thing. And that was a self-propelled version, which again inspired the Germans to build their own self-propelled version, the Wurfrahmen. But that's why they were only available in 1941. There were Nebelwerfer variants in 1940, but those are not capable of throwing rockets, so they don't exist as units in the game. But as I said, we can have one Nebelwerfer unit per core, I guess, and then upgrade that to a Wurfrahmen later, I guess. But we should probably not have two Wurfrahmen units. That's a little much. They weren't used in those numbers.
We don't have that many core slots anyways.
We will.
Yeah, but at the moment we really have to decide what to deploy.
Yeah, but we can put it in the reserve.
I have too many tanks at the moment, but I'm not going to deploy them anyways.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to deploy one of them either. My Panzer II is at 2 stars, and I've probably not deployed anymore until I can upgrade it to a Flammenpanzer. Because also you have to keep in mind, yes, you see the Panzer divisions are still using that many Panzer IIs, yes, but as you can see when I go back to the graphics, those are the light platoon of a company. And those things are not really meant to engage a whole lot. Those are meant to go for recon and support duty. The 20mm gun is great against machine gun nests and some lightly armored trucks and other crap. But those are not supposed to engage enemy tanks. That's not what they're for. So the main tanks, the main platoons of those companies are Panther IIIs and Panzer IVs almost exclusively by 1941. So yes, we can have Panzer IIs, but it's not really representative anymore of the actual Panzer divisions. In 1939, and still to a certain degree in 1940, those were filling up the ranks in the actual combat platoons. 1941, that's not the case anymore. So if we don't deploy any Panzer IIs anymore, it's still realistic. Yes, there are still Panzer IIs in the division, but those are used for recon purposes and support duty. Those are not the frontline tanks anymore by 1941. So if it's certainly okay if we don't deploy any. We can, but we don't need to. So that's why I will not upgrade them to Flampanzers exclusively. Yeah, in terms of infantry, as I said earlier in another stream, the heavy weapons infantry basically doesn't exist in reality. But since the firepower, as I mentioned, got upped a lot in 1941, since they basically doubled the number of machine guns, and they also will give them by late 1941 also anti-tank guns and anti-tank rifles and stuff on top of that, and double other heavy equipment, I think it is justified at any point for us to upgrade to heavy weapons infantry. It's just a matter of, are we sure that's worth the loss in mobility? If we get a movement hero, no problem. We can immediately upgrade. There's nothing historical that says anything against that. Half-tracks is a different story. Is no justification for us to have more than one half-track per division. I would even argue to a certain degree that maybe only one half-track per corps, but since you are using exactly those divisions, no, you're actually using only one division, the 10th that has the half-tracks, and I also only use one. Yeah, so I actually say only one infantry unit in the entire corps can have half-tracks.
That's fine, and I just looked. Actually, I only have 5 tanks, so I was completely mistaken.
Yeah, I thought you had less than me.
Yeah.
Because I had so many SE tanks already.
I got the numbers wrong, yeah.
I think the main difference is the SE tanks, because I got so many SE tanks. I got even one more for Belgrade, but it disbanded that already.
I have only 5 tanks in Belgrade, and I only have on top of that the Panzer II. So
yeah, I wouldn't buy one, because I'm pretty sure you get an additional SE tank soon, because the SE number got upped in 1941. So you should get a new one pretty soon. I'm going to disband mine because I have one tank too many, but you can keep yours. But I think you're one short anyway. Shouldn't you get 2 more? How many SE tanks do you have?
2.
You only have 2. I thought you only had 1. Okay, well, if you have 2 already, then maybe you can buy another one. I don't know. How many regular tanks do you have?
3.
Well, then I think you're good for another tank.
So I always have been very low on tanks.
I think you can buy another tank then, but you can think about that.
No, it's fine, because I will get an additional SC tank, so that's exactly 6. That's perfect.
Yeah, I will keep disbanding the SE tank to get prestige, because I don't need it. And that's what we originally intended to do anyway. We always wanted to keep one lower than the maximum, so we could keep disbanding it to get the prestige in Rommel.
Oh, not really. I just wanted to do that with the infantry, but the tanks I'm going to keep.
Okay, I will probably do that until I reach Russia. I probably will. Well, I don't know, because I already have as many tanks as I need. I will think about it. In 1942, I will definitely keep it. 1941, I will think about it. I'm a little behind you in prestige anyway, thanks to Arras, thanks to Spoiled War, and thanks to Marginal Line. Thank you, Mod. Oh yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to show. I think I never showed that graphic that I made, right?
Nope.
Let me actually show you guys that. Because I also think you haven't seen the updated version from the most recent ones. Let me see, how does this display?
I have to go very soon anyway, so
yeah, we're pretty much done anyway. After I'm done with this graphics,
thing I'm going to watch.
Here I also added another tab which shows actual prestige gains per scenario, and here you can see where we differ. You basically can see that, sometimes the prestige gains of the scenario actually are the impact of the scenario before that, but sometimes it's different. No, I actually compensated for that, so they are in the scenario that they're showing here. You can see Spoils of War is a major difference between us. I mean, in Warsaw, you also got a lot more than I, but I think I bought some stuff in Warsaw, and obviously I had a harder time in Warsaw since I got in from the other side. But at Spoils of War, I lost prestige and you gained. I think that shows that there was something off there. In Oslo, that difference, I know why that is. In Oslo, I bought a whole bunch of... I basically bought my entire 2nd division in Oslo, so that's not a consequence of the scenario. But I think you can see that in Arras, there's again a major difference. You won 585 prestige and I lost 85. And you can see marginal line is again a major difference. Ras, yeah, that's also a major difference, but that's just because I fucked up in that scenario, so. You can see where the difference is. I did better at Sedan, but that might have been due to you buying stuff or not. Maubeuge Stun, yeah, Maubeuge was obviously a little bit harder than Stun. Arras was a major disaster for me. Calais, Amiens were again pretty close. Dunkirk, I did better because I got a major victory. At Ras, yeah, I basically got my Panzers mauled at Ras and lost my 2 scouts, so that's why I'm bad there. But yeah, it's interesting. If we go for the actual comparison view where we are in total, you can see that we're basically, so just as an explanation for you guys, the gray line is what we expect that our prestige will go like. So we'll basically reach 20,000 by the end of 1942. And by that time, I expect us to not be able to gain prestige anymore because it's the late war years, and from that on, we should lose prestige. As long as we stay above this gray line, we should be good. So currently we are. The reason why I'm dropping so close to the gray line again is actually not due to marginal line. That's because I bought some additional stuff. I bought a bridge engineer, for example. And I disbanded my destroyed scout and I bought a better version. So I lost the hero on it, but I think it was a crap hero anyway. I bought a new one. I bought a better version. I wanted the all-terrain version. The other one was a road-bound version. And I didn't want to reinstate it and then upgrade it because that would be double the cost. So that's pointless just to keep the hero. I think it was a defense hero anyway, so that's not really that useful. What else did I do? Yeah, basically upgrade everything, and yeah, I was happy as long as I'm hoping I get a little bit beyond that line. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to upgrade my stuff to the best that I can. As long as I stay above the line from now on, I will try not to drop below it. But you're already pretty far beyond it, actually, so you should be fine. But you can
it's good to have some reserves.
Yeah, but you can see where we are basically splitting up. I think Arras is a pretty obvious point. That's that dip right there. You can pretty much see that after Arras, I can't keep up with you anymore. So Arras really screwed me over, and I think the modded version without the additional auxiliary forces, which could have taken the damage that I didn't need to repair, I could have stabilized the front with a lot of 88s instead of with my own tanks, which obviously weren't up to the task. Yeah. It is again historically incorrect. There were a lot of 88s that did make the difference in that area, so the mod taking those away is not good for the gameplay, and it's not good for historical.
The mod doesn't actually take it away, but you disbanded them on purpose just so that we have the same amount of slots, because I think the mod gives you more deployment slots on top of the auxiliary units.
Yeah, that may be so. So I disbanded them because I thought the mod was making a mistake. Because in the mod README, it actually said that it got rid of them and replaced them with core slots. And when I thought they were still there,
I remember,
I should have decided to keep them and deploy less. That would have been the better choice. But I wanted to go with the plan of the modder, because that's what it does in other scenarios. So yeah, maybe that I screwed myself over there, yeah, but I did so because that's what the mod's intention was. So I should have had less deployment slots and should have kept the auxiliary forces. That's what I should have done. And in marginal line, it was again, that's where it really did that. It got rid of auxiliary forces, got me more deployment slots. The same thing that happened in Spoils of War. And each of those scenarios yeah, dropped me behind you. So I don't want that to keep going. Not only because, yeah, I don't want to drop that far behind until I have trouble in the scenarios, but also because by now every one of those changes, well, maybe not Spoils of War because that's ahistorical anyway, but in both Arras and in Marginal Line, it actually made the scenario less historically accurate, and that is not what I want.
Yeah, sure. And Spoils of War, at least you got two core Panzerjäger, so don't forget that.
Yeah, sure, that was good, but I also took more damage on my regular units because I didn't have auxiliary units that could take those hits. The cavalry units could have blocked positions ahead that I needed to block with Ole Dier and my Gradschützen, and especially Ole Dier, I think, got a lot of damage. And some other units that I had to send ahead got a lot of damage. So yeah, it's always better if you can have auxiliary users that take damage because you don't need to repair them.
Definitely.
Those certainly changed the odds. I also obviously had less recon information because the cavalry is actually great for recon purposes. So that was not so great. Also, I lost one of the Panzerjägers and had to reinstate it, so I didn't actually have one more. I had to pay for that one because I lost it. So yeah, that I can still compensate for that. From what I know, 41 is still a campaign where you can still gain a lot of prestige. So I expect myself to go way past that line. You will still be ahead of me, but we should both be well above that line by the end of 1941. But that's what we will check ourselves against. As long as we don't drop below this, we should not be in trouble. If we drop far below this, we might actually want to think about replaying something, but because we might end up in trouble in later DLCs. But for now, it doesn't look that way. I would be well beyond the line if I hadn't decided to go for a lot of elite reemplacements and upgrades, which I technically don't need yet. In Belgrade, also, I didn't need the bridge engineer, which was quite expensive, but I could afford it, and I decided if I want one, it's probably best to buy it now, otherwise it won't be able to get any experience at all. And I kind of always wanted one of those, just, you know, to have it in the core, just in case I want to do some tactics that use one bridge engineer, who knows. So I bought it now, but I will still be fine in terms of prestige from now on because I already did most of my upgrades, so I don't need any additional ones. I already got a Stug, I already got basically everything that I need. I think the only thing that I didn't do yet is upgrade my level bomber, my Dornier level bomber. But that's the only expensive upgrade that's still left, so I should be fine.
Well, you can still stay on, but I really have to quit now. So thanks for watching.
Yes, we're done anyway. I'm only gonna answer questions.
Next time, I think, yeah. Usually it goes on a long time. If I come back and watch the video later, usually after I leave, there are 2 more hours.
Yeah, that's usually me and Karel Wolfpapp talking about all kinds of crap. Yeah.
Perfect. So, yeah, thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye.
Bye, Brock. So as I said, I will try to not go too far into the future with this one this time. But if you have any questions about anything, also about the map, Brock, in case, not Brock, Karel Wolfpapp, in case you missed something, have any questions about this, just let me know. And yeah, I will answer what I can. Also about the layout of the Panther divisions and anything else, in case you still have questions. I know I showed those overviews with those symbols. In case you don't know what those symbols mean, I can post this maybe in the chat. That's the website where those overviews are. These are the original German graphics and the original German tactical symbols, and that's the site that explains them. And you can basically, if you click on home over here, then you can go to the index, to the country. There's also other countries in here, but if you go then to Germany, and then you have here the different years, and if you then click here 1939, for example, then you have the Panzer divisions over here, and then you can look at what they looked like, at least according to the paper. And down here it even has the individual numbers for equipment. So if there's any questions about this stuff, let me know. This guy Niehurst wrote a book about this stuff also. I'm not sure what one, but he's one of the more well-known World War II historians, I think. And I've seen original documents, so I have the original stuff. Oh crap, I forgot something. Hope Brock will look that up later in the recording. This is the original map about the campaign that the Germans did, as you can see down here, in July 1940 in Paris. So you can see here the green lines with the progress of the front for each day. That's actually part of what I use to make my progress lines, but I also use the West Point Atlas and some other stuff from books. But most of the frontline development I got from here. These little arrows show when individual cities have been taken, and then I looked up what unit was actually going there, so I could draw the bigger, longer arrows. And here you can see the capitulation of this army group in this area, as they got encircled by Guderian. So this is one of those Russian archives where they got all these original documents digitized now that are in a Russian archive. And there are such documents in there that look like this, that are basically showing what a Panzer division is supposed to look like in that year. So I know these are actually accurate because I looked them up in the original documents. I also have the original order for Case Red, so by Hitler, so I know what they were planning. These 3 phases of the attack: first the Seine, then the breakthrough at Ras, and then going for the marginal line encirclement. So just in case there's anybody in the chat who hasn't seen it yet, this map is actually available. I'm going to post the link again. You can play around with it. By the way, has anybody tried that? Yeah, Brock actually tried it, so it should work. So you can play around with this and turn individual things on and off. So in case there's not going to be any more questions, I will probably call it quits in about 5 minutes or so. Fix this. One of my acoustic foams is coming off the wall again. I need to find a different glue for that. The sad part is it's not helping to improve my audio that much either. So, a little sad about that. So you might want to watch this stuff again at some point, because I probably went quite fast over a lot of information, but I'm trying to fit as much as I can into these videos, so I don't keep Rock around here for too long. And I don't want to stick around too long today either, because I have to go to work tomorrow again. Why do I always see a chat in my stream that I don't see on the actual stream page? Okay, in OBS I can actually see more of the chat that I can see on my streaming dashboard. Let me reload that. I can already see Karolfa being... Yes, now I can see it. Looking forward to chaos in Russia. Yeah, that will happen. But first we need to tackle Yugoslavia and Greece. That'll be fun also. No, it's actually Richard Martin looking forward to the chaos. And Moonbeam Fox seems to be happy about the map. How's work for me? Great. It's actually a pretty good company that I work on. It's a lot of fun. I like working there. Yeah, let me go once more about the development of the front, just in case someone hasn't seen that. Just let me click through it one by one. And we'll call it a day. So this is where it all starts. I have that line once with 21st May and once with 5th June, because between those days nothing happened, at least not on that front. So 2 days to break through. First breakthrough happened over here. They reached the Rouen 1 day later. And not the Rouen, they reached the Seine at Rouen 1 day later. And Guderian stuff started. He actually got redeployed into this area until the 10th of June, so he didn't start attacking before the 10th of June. He was still being reassigned and re-equipped and sent over here, so it's not like it took 10 days to break through or anything like that, or 5 days. He only started attacking on the 10th. And as I said, the infantry first had to do the river crossing, and then he was allowed to go in with his tanks. And once he did, he also obviously made quick progress. On the 14th, Paris fell. And then basically also the First Army started to cross the marginal line. And yeah, they started pushing south relatively quickly. Again, I'm not sure that these arrows are accurate, that they were that early down there, but might have been off by 1 or 2 days. But by this day it makes sense again. Now Guderian is swinging around to encircle this area, while Kleist is still pushing south to Lyon, and by now over here, Hoth with Rommel and the other guys, Manstein taking Le Mans, and yeah, now basically they take the entire Channel Coast, and it's only a matter of time by now. By now there is already armistice negotiations by the 20th, so now the Germans are just trying to grab as much as they can before it goes into effect, but it's already basically over by the 20th. And this is the very roughly the line of furthest expanse. Nobody knows exactly how far anybody got, because by now that wasn't really an exact front line anymore. But people are pretty sure nobody got past this line, but nobody knows exactly how far the Germans actually got. And then that's the agreed on demarcation line, which gives the entire Atlantic coast to the Germans, obviously for obvious reasons. Richard Martin had a question. Let me scroll up. So a Panzer division looks like 3 tanks. I'm assuming that's the question because I don't see another one. So a Panzer division looks like 3 tanks, 4 infantry, 1 pack gun, 3 artillery. No, there's additional stuff. Let me look into this actually. Let me find a good example. Yeah. So you can see up here, each of those, you basically have to look at those triangle flags. That's a platoon. No, not a platoon, a battalion. I think I said platoon earlier in the video also. Sorry, it's a battalion. Platoon is much less. A battalion is these triangle flags. So those things represent the units in our game, in the way that we interpreted. So you can see that some have 4 panzers, some have 2, some have 3, so the average is around 3. They're still not fully standardized on that. And for various other reasons, it's also more realistic to take 3 so we can represent the proper mixture of the tanks. But as you can see, we have basically 2 to 3 panzers, 4 regular infantry units and 1 Kraftschützen unit, 3 artillery units, of which 1 is heavy. We have 1 recon unit, that's also important, that's part of the division, 1 anti-tank unit, and 1 pioneer unit. These are non-combat units, that's the transport unit, that's the signal communications unit. And those are hospital and food and all that kind of stuff. And that's not a combat unit either. Those are just training new troops, and if one of those guys dies, that's where they're coming from. That's just replacement guys. So those are not fighting units either. So the regular combat units is 3 tanks, 4 infantry, 1 Kraftschützen, 3 artillery, of which 1 is heavy, 1 recon, 1 pioneer, 1 anti-tank. That's what that looks like. In case that wasn't the question you were asking, you need to ask it again, because that's the only one I saw. On top of that, we have some specialized units like Flammpanzer and all that kind of stuff, which are not actually part of the Panzer divisions, but which were deployed in special areas. Since we're not just playing one Panzer division, we're playing basically a Panzer Corps of 2 divisions. We're allowed to have some Corps level special stuff. Like for now the 88s, which are not yet part of the Panzer division. Later a Flammpanzer, maybe a Nebelwerfer, maybe a bridge engineer, that kind of stuff. The Panzerjägers, which were also independent units. But the actual Panzer divisions, that's what they are. So the Panzer divisions basically consist of 1 anti-tank, that's 1, Pioneer, that's 2, Recon, that's 3, Artillery, that's 6, the Kraftschützen, that's 7, the 4 Infantry, that is 11, and 3 Panzers, that's 14. So basically a Panzer division is right now 14 units. So both divisions 28. So we need 28 slots to deploy both of our divisions. Plus Air Force, of course. And it will probably grow because we might attach the 88 to it. That would make it 15 per division. We might attach a Stug to it. That makes, or maybe 1 artillery Stug and maybe 1 anti-tank Stug. That would make it 1670 per division. So we will have to figure that out, what we can actually deploy. Yeah, in relation to building a corps, as I said, a corps is basically 2 or 3 divisions. Since 1 division in a Panzer Corps at this point in time is basically 1 motorized division and only 2 Panzer divisions. Since we only represent the Panzer divisions, we have 2 Panzer divisions. So everything that I just said is basically there twice. Stupid acoustics foam. Yeah, no problem, Richard Martin. Again, in case there's no more questions, we can call it quits, and then everybody that missed something can watch it from the start. I think we covered everything anyway. I think we got actually pretty well through all the topics today, so I'm pretty happy with that. And I don't want to drag it all too long, so you guys have 1 minute left to ask more questions. After that, I will call it quits. By the way, guys, do you actually like this way of drawing on the map and this interactive map stuff that I make available? I tried a long time to find something where I can do that I can also publish. So let me know whether you like that kind of stuff. I'm not sure that I can actually do that for Russia at this level of detail, because the Russian front is huge and I don't think I can figure out what the hell is going on where and tell you where every single Panzer division is at whatever point in time. But I think I will be able to at least show you the front at the point in time where we play the scenario, roughly at least, and tell you what was roughly going on at the time that we are playing the scenario and why that is there. For example, there is later coming up a scenario that's called the Demyansk pocket, and I will tell you where that pocket is and why it's there and stuff like that. I think especially for North Americans, these maps can be helpful because they give you a better idea of the general geography. For example, Rundstedt's headquarters was for a while in Bastogne. And I think most Americans probably know that town. Let me actually check where it is. Let me get rid of the people. Let me get rid of the front lines. And the order of battle. There we go. Let me check. Where's Bastogne? It should be somewhere over here. If anybody sees it, let me know. I think it should be on visible already. No, that's not what I'm looking for. That one is what I'm looking for. Stupid thing. It finds it and then it tells me something else. Bastogne, Nasogne, where's Bastogne? I hate that I can look for it and it doesn't show me it. There we go. No, it's still not that one. It's gotta be in this area somewhere. I shouldn't have gotten rid of the roads. If I could see the roads, then I would know where it is. Because there's obviously a big road crossing there. That's why that was so important. Looks like it was renamed. Really? Sonia was renamed? That's the first thing I heard of it. On any map I have seen, it's still called that. Let me check that actually. Oh crap, it is Bastogne. Yeah, that's the German name for Bastogne. This stupid thing is showing me the German name. Obviously, that's not what I wanted, but anyway. I actually have to figure out why that is happening. I don't want that. It's actually a Google Maps base map, so Google Maps is probably translating the names. But that is Bastogne, yeah. I was looking at that and thinking that has to be here somewhere. That was actually Reichenau's headquarters during the Battle of France. So that's a fun fact of history if you know if you know what happened there later. Houffalize, I think, is also pretty important later. If you look over here. Where are we? Yeah, if you look at the advance of the Germans, Rommel is actually going past Falaise, and the Falaise gap should also mean something to the Americans among you. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here that obviously what was actually Omaha Beach? That was this part, right? I think this was Omaha Beach, right? So yeah. I think that was the other American beach. Then there were 2 British and 1 Canadian or something. We'll cover that once we get there, but as you can see, these are familiar battlegrounds. There's just other stuff happening on them. Obviously, Bastogne as a road crossing is a good place to have your headquarters as an army group commander, since you can easily send stuff and get stuff there with a good road connection, so that makes sense. Right there. It's called Basnacht, but it means Bastogne. Well, horrible stuff happened all over the place here, but I also found it interesting in this area where Manstein attacks, actually. Manstein's corps is this one, that one. As I said, it's a regular infantry corps. I just put him on the map because it's Manstein, otherwise I can't put every corps on the map. Just put this one normal infantry corps on here because it's Manstein, and you probably are interested in what he was doing at the time. So he's basically the guy that pushing for Le Mans and took Le Mans. He writes about that a little bit in his book. He doesn't use a lot of his book's space to talk about the Battle of France, probably because he was pissed that he had to sit most of it out. But one thing that he wrote, which also tells you a little bit about his kind of attitude towards certain things at the time, was that the French in that area actually fought bravely, he said. And just as to give you a little bit of background, the troops that he was facing were some colonial divisions of the French, so from Africa, and some from Alsace. So he said basically that the Alsace guys, since they were Germans technically to him still, since they had lost that area only after First World War, were fighting valiantly, and the black guys were fighting also hard with their bloodlust and lack of value for life and that kind of thing. So yeah, that gives you an idea of what Manstein thought of blacks. Even though initially he said they fight valiantly, he really meant it positively for the quasi-Germans, and yeah, he gave them a little bit of a strange interpretation for why the black guys were fighting valiantly. The French record of actually that they did fight very well, that the colonial infantry divisions actually did fight fantastically, but Manstein apparently had his own interpretation on why. Bloodlust and yeah, lack of value for life. Lack of valuing life. That's, yeah, weird. But that is something that is in Manstein's book that tells you a little bit about Manstein, I guess. Fun fact that he later wrote a book called A Soldier in the 20th Century. I guess he should have arrived in the 20th century before writing something like that. But yeah, he was pretty much stuck in the olden days. Yeah, so were the French. I mean, they were the ones that held on the longest to their colonial empire, or tried to hold on to it. So they were also a little bit backwards, but yeah, this statement certainly tells you everything about Manstein that you need to know. And consider that he wrote the book after the war, so that during this time a lot of people had this attitude towards blacks in Germany. I can or in general in Central Europe, I can see, but after the war they should have learned from certain things, but he still wrote stuff like that. Yeah, exactly, Tasnauer. Considering what was going on in Poland already for almost half a year by now, or over half a year by now, considering that, calling out the blacks here for not having a good value of life, yeah. He should have looked a little bit behind himself, in front of his own door. In front of his own doorstep, yeah, before saying something like that. But yeah, that's kind of obvious, I guess. It's also a little bit weird here if you look at these people. For example, I think Hoff was a war criminal later, while I think Höppner or Wiedersheim and one of these other guys was part of the resistance. So people fighting side by side here. One guy turns out to be a war criminal, the other one ends up in the military resistance against Hitler. So yeah, early on they're all on the same side, later on it all falls apart. Oh yeah, there are some black prisoners that were executed later. That actually happened in Rommel's area. But I think that already happened during Fall Gelb, but it happened here again. I think I'm not sure it happened in Rommel's area here. I think it happened in Rommel's area near Arras, but it was an SS unit. He didn't have anything to do with it, even though technically he would have been responsible for it, but he didn't know about it. But it happened here, unfortunately, again. A number of a couple thousand, I think, or just a couple hundred. I'm not sure. I don't want to name numbers now because I don't remember how many it were, but a number of black prisoners from the colonial divisions were executed, yeah. So unfortunately that shit was already happening. And in this case, I'm not sure whether it was SS or not. During Fall Gelb, I'm pretty sure it was SS. It was one of the Waffen-SS units that was under Rommel's command, but which then panicked in the front of the enemy during the actual counterattack of Arras. So, like I said last time, those guys were not really effective. They just threw away lives and material and were not really good in combat. They were just good at killing innocent people. But yeah, before we go into that political crap, I think we all know about that and we have heard it enough. It's horrible enough as it is. I'm gonna try to limit myself on the military history and just tell you how these battles went. I think we all agree that it would have been better if this hadn't happened at all, but it did. So let's try and figure out what happened, how it happened, and what was the reasons for it happening the way it did. Again, as I said, the equipment of the French was actually decent, but it didn't arrive in time sometimes. Sometimes it was deployed in the wrong places. The units that needed them didn't get them. It was also great that one of the corps commanders that was part of the counterattack at Abbeville was actually the corps commander that was also in the Sedan sector and had also messed up the counterattacks there by throwing in the Panzers, the French tanks piecemeal, instead of actually focusing and consolidating them first, which would actually have been what French tank doctrine told was supposed to be done, but he messed that up and basically did exactly the same here again. Why he was put in command again in such a crucial sector after messing up one already, I don't know, but yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, that happened. There were certainly some great German officers in here that had a lot of honor. Well, I mean, in some parts of France, there was horrible stuff going on. But if you ask the people of Paris, most of them didn't flee or didn't have time to flee or anything like that. So most of them just stuck around. And when the Germans entered, most of the French actually were pretty much indifferent. There was also a lot of conspiracy theories in this war that the French pacifist movement was responsible for this, or the socialist movement was responsible for this. You know, basically the standard crap. If you're conservative, you always blame the socialists for everything and the other way around. But there was certainly a strong pacifist movement, and you can't deny that a lot of the French population basically looked at this war with indifference at its outcome. They just didn't care because they were just not in favor of this war to be fought at all. You can argue about that, but the French troops certainly fought valiantly all over the place. It was just a higher leadership that was a total disaster. The lower ranked, the NCOs and the junior officers, certainly proved that they could go toe-to-toe with the Germans, but it just got let down by their overall battle planning and leadership and lack of communication to be able to actually cooperate properly. Lack of radios, all that kind of stuff that made the difference compared to the Germans. And of course the complete planning disaster with the Brada variant in the original plan, which led to the disaster at Dunkirk. But the troops certainly fought well, and their morale was pretty high even right before Case Red. So you can all the stuff of the French can only run away and all those jokes is complete nonsense. The troops were actually fighting very, very hard and gave the Germans a bloody nose more than one time, especially when they didn't have the surprise. The Germans didn't have the surprise on their side anymore, and leadership was causing havoc all over the place. Most of the really good fighting French fought in the gap, and there they held on to the shelled front for quite a number of days. Army Group B had a hard time breaking through there and collapsing the gap. And here, yeah, they held the line for 2 days and did so very well, and also showed that they were very capable of stopping German tanks. They just didn't have the manpower at that time anymore to stop them completely, because, as I said, the Germans were outnumbering 2-1 at that time already. The junior officers did well. The higher officers, the higher ranking officers in HQ and the higher army levels and stuff like that were just too stuck in the old ways, and the forms of communication just weren't there, and the French and the British just didn't cooperate well at all, and the cooperation with the Belgian army was just basically non-existent either. So all these three allies basically didn't know what each of the other one could contribute, where they were, what they were doing, what state they were in. They just didn't communicate very well at all. In terms of effectively fighting as allies and being able to go toe-to-toe with the Germans completely, that won't happen until 1943. So it's a long learning curve for the allies. But it'll happen. It'll happen. And the Germans aren't perfect yet either. They still have problems and they have to work them out. So only in 1942 they have the perfect mixture of what a Panzer division is actually supposed to look like and have the equipment in it. But that's basically the only year where everything is the way it's supposed to be. After that, we all know what happened. After that, they lacked the materials. They lost a whole lot of men. They're running out of manpower and all that kind of thing. But early 1942 is probably the state where the German Wehrmacht is at its peak in terms of organization and having figured out how to do mobile arms warfare properly. Not that they have all the equipment that they need, obviously, but they're closest to what they actually should have been right from the start. But yeah, a little too late, obviously. But it took all these countries a long time to figure out how to do this properly. How to get communication right, how to get cooperation right, how to get the higher leadership out of the way. I mean, basically, all the, absolutely. The lack of radios on the Allied side is absolutely a major part of why this went the way it went. Being able to react to situations quickly And the higher leadership, we also always blame the higher leadership for making stupid decisions. But if you don't know what's going on, it's hard to make a right decision. You know, and most of these guys didn't know what was going on. Even on German side, it was hard to figure out what was going on because Rommel and Guderian were all over the place and they didn't report back. And even then, it took a while to arrive. It did. At least the radios allowed them to cooperate on the lower level with their neighbors, you know, even if the higher command didn't know what was going on, but they at least to some degree let them do what they were doing. On the French side, the communication was much worse. That's also why all these armored counterattacks just didn't work. Unlike the Germans, the Allied tanks didn't have any connection to air support, didn't have any connection to infantry, didn't have any connection to their allies. So the French tanks didn't know what the British tanks were doing. They couldn't talk to infantry. They couldn't talk to air support, even if it was there. The Germans had that. They could call in Stuka attacks. They could talk to their infantry. They could talk to the other tanks. Made a huge difference. It's not that the French couldn't fight, it's that they couldn't get the coordination going that modern warfare needed in order to be effective. That's why they all ran into problems. They didn't know where they were, they didn't know where their partners were, they didn't know where their allies were, they didn't know what was going on. And high command usually wasn't informed about what unit was still around, what unit still was in fighting strength, and that's why Weygand went for counterattacks here. He wasn't aware that the guys in the pocket just weren't able to break out anymore. They didn't have the forces anymore. They didn't have the fighting strength anymore. They couldn't do that. And when he realized that, he apparently fell into complete depression. And yeah, that also isn't helpful either. It's not the guys on the ground. The guys on the ground fought just as well as anybody else. Well, his command vehicle, that's look at these things. Most of these tanks in this upper row are command tanks. Those have radios. Those don't actually have guns. In this top level, I think one of those, the first one, is an actual tank. The other ones are command tanks. They're variants without a gun, they're stuck full of radios. So. Yeah, the radio was the most important thing ever. And Guderian had an advantage in pushing for that because he was a communications officer before that. So he was very well aware of the importance of a radio. Yeah, the layout of the turrets and that kind of stuff was also a problem, that the commander had to man the gun, and in addition to commanding the tanks, the chieftain, I think, pointed out how bad of an idea that is also. But the Germans, again, had the advantage of testing the tanks in Russia and figuring that out. They did training and they could figure that out. The French, basically most of the French units only got their newest tanks a couple of weeks before this campaign started. So not only were they not familiar with them necessarily, they also couldn't give feedback on how to improve them. I mean, most of those units were still trained on Renault FT tanks. So that was a very big step up in terms of equipment. I mean, the equipment, it still would have been fine. If you look at what the Char B and the Samoa tanks are doing, most of the time they completely overrun German positions. But if you don't have infantry support, you read a lot. If you read in that book, you read in several places, the French tanks go forward, rout the Germans. The German anti-tank guns don't do anything at all. But then they got separated from their infantry and had to turn back. Couldn't exploit the breakthrough. That's exactly, by the way, what happens if you're currently following the World War II channel on YouTube, which I highly recommend, if Indy Nadell and crew. They currently talked about the Winter War, that now the Russians are actually, the Soviets, improving their method, but in December they attacked the same way. Tanks first, tanks broke through but got separated from their infantry and had to turn back. Doesn't work that way. A tank alone can break through, but it can't exploit that. So they basically broke through and had to turn back because they didn't get the infantry through. And that's exactly what happened here also. The French tanks actually did break through. They did achieve something. In certain cases, they destroyed supply columns from the Germans. They overrun their anti-tank positions because the anti-tank guns just bounced off them. They didn't do anything. But yeah, they couldn't exploit it because they couldn't communicate and get that breakthrough, that tactical breakthrough, turn that into an operational one. They also didn't have the air support because they couldn't communicate properly to get air support, so that was a major problem. I wish I could help those guys in some way, but I think they have everything they need. I already am pretty glad that they got that other guy to animate the maps for them, because that's really, really cool. I don't think I could contribute a whole lot. I wish I could, but I don't have the time to dig up stuff. What do you mean, efficient strategy game? The first grand discussion by Joker was so good. What about this one? Anyway, yeah, there's a whole lot going on, and I'm really glad that World War II channel is around, because there's a whole bunch they got there. I'm actually not so happy with one point of the recent episode where they said that Quisling convinced Hitler to go ahead with the invasion of Norway. I think when I made my stream about the Norway invasion, I made it clear that Quisling actually probably didn't have that much influence at all, and that Hitler planned to go ahead with that completely independent of Quisling. So I'm not sure that is a historical fact, even though it's very big urban legend. I'm not sure Quisling had any influence whatsoever on a lot of things. Whether he convinced Hitler to go ahead with it, I don't know. He probably convinced Hitler that it would be possible to get a government going once that took place, but I don't or that it could possibly be done without actually fighting the Norwegians or something like that. But the actual decision to do it, I think, had little to do with Quisling. So, oh yeah, the Sabaton History channel. I am looking forward to that also. I think their first video is coming soon. So yeah, I am subscribed to that already. Yeah, absolutely. And I recommend everybody does so, because, hey, Ghost Division, that one song, I mean, that's very, very current to where we are right now. So, absolutely. And it's a great song too. But yeah, there's a whole bunch still coming. We're only in the second year of the war. Obviously, 1940 had some other stuff going on. Before this started, we had the Winter War coming to an end. Norway, we talked about that since we actually played it. I wish the Winter War was part of the Grand Campaign. And of course, before this happened, Soviet Union annexed the Baltic states and all that kind of stuff. So I will look up what happened actually in late 1940. I mean, Battle of Britain, we all know about that. I will not go too much into that. We all know what happened there. But I'm not sure whether something happened in Africa actually in 1940 already. Probably between the Italians and the British. I'll have to look that up. I think something happened there in late 1940, but I will try to summarize that for next time when we look into what happened in Belgrade. Why is Germany actually invading Yugoslavia? Why the fuck did that happen? Because that didn't happen because of Greece. They just went into Greece after that because that just, yeah, happened to be on the way. Why not help the Italians also? But Yugoslavia actually had a different story. Just to summarize that, there was basically a government that was thinking about joining the Axis. Then there was a change of government, and then those joined the Allies or didn't want to join the Axis. there was also a pact for resources, a contract that was supposed to go into place. So when that fell flat because there was a change of government and the other government went exactly the opposite way, that's when the Axis decided to invade. So that had a whole bunch of reasons. There was also some stuff going on between Romania and Hungary, where Germany took some steps to negotiate. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the preparation for Barbarossa, so I will try to summarize most of that for next time. A whole bunch of interesting stuff going on before we actually go into Russia in the summer of next year. Yeah, Ghost Division is absolutely fantastic, and it's very accurate. Actually, the Ghost Division was a little bit of a joke later. Some generals even teased Rommel with it, the Ghost Division, that they made a... No, the Comintern was the actual... the anti-communist pact. Yeah, that was Italy, Germany, and Japan. That was the anti-Comintern. And Comintern is just the Communist International. That's basically Soviet expansion for international communism. And the Axis was basically the anti-Comintern, yeah, which wasn't really a military alliance because Japan and Germany never really cooperated on anything in practical terms. But no, that's what I think it was. The Steel Pact or something like that. Let me look into that. Invasion of Yugoslavia. Let me see. Prelude. Yeah, Hitler once Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary joined, which they did in 1941, early 1941. Hitler pressured Yugoslavia to join as well. They also made a pact to get some resources. The regent prince actually agreed, and they joined in March 1941. But that was so unpopular with the Serbian-dominated officer corps that a large part of the Serbian population, military officers, and some communists basically made a coup d'etat on 2 days later, forced the regent to resign, and yeah, that coup basically caused the German invasion. Yeah, the tripartite agreement, that was the one that they were supposed to join, which they did, but 2 days later there was a coup, because the Serbs were not happy with that. Yeah, anti-Comintern had nothing to do with it. That was just the Axis. This was just basically the alliance in Europe that Hungary and all those other ones joined as well. I think it was the Tripartite Pact, yeah. But again, what they joined is not important. They were supposed to join the alliance, which would have had certain advantages for the Germans, obviously, resources and having the Balkans under control and all that kind of stuff. Because, yeah, the Serbs weren't happy with that, and 2 days after they actually joined, I think in Hearts of Iron that's even a series of events where they can actually potentially stay in, or they can leave, or they can join the Allies, or they can stay neutral, or whatever. And then you can decide, depending on that, whether you want to invade or not. Yeah. The Germans weren't happy with that coup and having a potential ally nation again in that area where they couldn't need it, especially not right before they planned Barbarossa. They wanted that flank free, so they invaded. But as I said, I don't want to drag this out too long. Kept talking for 40 minutes already, so let's keep this trimmed down. We're already talking about Yugoslavia. We'll do that next time after we actually played it. That and the Greece invasion and the invasion of whatever the island is called. I forgot. Cyprus, I think. No, not Cyprus. Is it Cyprus? No. Let me check. Actually, no. Crete, not Cyprus. I'm a moron. That's the one. That's the split one. Crete, obviously. Was Cyprus actually invaded? I know Cyprus was, I think, was under British control during World War II. Pretty sure. I think that was never invaded. And Cyprus was under British control, but Crete got invaded. So Belgrade, Metaxas line, which is Greece, and then Crete. So those we'll still have to do, and then in Minsk I think we actually get super rural. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah, Crete Sanct Efficient Strategy Gaming, but we'll call it a day. People are leaving already anyway, since we're just rambling on here. So for now, I'm calling it a day. And I hope you enjoyed everything that we talked about and everything that I showed you. As I said, this is all online. I posted a link a couple of times. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you liked the map work. And I hope I can get this done in the future as well, because it's a lot of work. And I always have to read up on... I buy entire books for every one of these videos, just so I can actually read up on what the hell is happening, because I don't know stuff in that detail prior to reading it about it, usually. So, until then, keep your heads up, folks. I'll see you on the next one, which will probably be my Belgrade video.